The bell tinkled 3 times, and then I heard my wife's voice.
There's a Protestant pastor here who wishes to speak with you.
What does he want? I asked anxiously.
I don't know, but it seems he wants to indoctrinate you.
Almost every Sunday, Protestant pastors or mere preachers would appear, seeking to indoctrinate us or extend invitations to their worship. Being an atheist in every sense of the word at that time, I found the lengthy biblical dissertations tiresome. In reality, I was averse to anything that smelled of religion. "Put, didn't we agree to go out for a walk today with the kids?" I remembered.
I don't think it's going to be possible, but it doesn't matter. If we don't go today, we'll go another day.
It's not fair for the children to miss out on their outing. They can have lunch and go by themselves. I'll stay, I told her. I had the urge to lose my composure and tell the Protestant that it wouldn't be possible to receive him. But, after all, the man wasn't bad, since he came to see if he could take me to heaven. I walked to the living room displeased, yet maintaining my gentlemanly demeanor and trying to smile. Waiting in the room, however, was a smartly dressed man. Protestant pastors are modest, and this one was far too decent. His shirt was clean and his collar starched. I faced him squarely, and my voice choked at the unexpected. I was facing the commander of a flying saucer. In November 1952, traveling with a friend, when we reached the top of the Angatuba mountain range in the state of São Paulo, on our way from Paraná, we came across 5 flying saucers hovering in the air. It was a rainy day, and we couldn't see anything beyond that. Later, I returned to the same spot, where I remained for 3 days and 3 nights, waiting for a disc to appear. On the last night, after a series of adventures, which we omit here to not stray from the purposes of this book, a craft landed, and we had the opportunity to visit its interior and meet its crew. After spending an hour visiting the interior of the craft, where the commander kindly explained its workings to us, the fascinating character promised that he would visit us as soon as he could. And now, 4 or 5 months later, he was keeping his word.
"I understand your state of mind due to the unexpected,"
he said to me, extending his hand.
"But I came to return the visit you made to my craft. I not only keep my word, but also come with great happiness to see you again."
"Indeed," I retorted. "I never expected to deserve such a pleasant gesture from you, especially since I have nothing to offer you but the hand of friendship."
"If you offered me the whole earth, but not the hand of friendship, it would be worthless. Only friendship truly has value. I gladly accept it, as I came to offer you the same thing, my hand of friendship. I want to apologize for having presented myself as a Protestant clergyman, but you must understand that your wife would have been shocked if she knew the truth."
It was a gentleman's lie. I excused him, and I must indeed thank you. She would be quite unhappy if she ever thought she had a husband engaged in outright subversive activity, in partnership with a foreign agent posing as a spacefaring knight-errant. In reality, I never believed in the extraterrestrial origin of flying saucers. This subject seemed to me more like an imposture by beings from our own Earth, who, taking advantage of humanity's vague desire to have brethren in our solar system, presented themselves as beings from another world to better carry out unspeakable activities. But the visitor reacted with a smile, and added,
"I assure you that the insinuation is unfounded, but there is no doubt that it is your duty to guard against possible complications. However, rest assured that if I were a foreign agent, I would have long since dominated the Earth, and you would no longer exist, due to your curiosity in entering the craft."
At that moment, my wife appeared with the children. She informed me that lunch was ready and that I should invite the pastor. She was leaving and would not return until the evening. During lunch, I wanted to test the linguistic knowledge of my guest and see if I could determine his origin by his accent. I steered the conversation towards the Christian religion and asked him to remind me of the first words of the Bible in Hebrew, to which he promptly complied. without showing the slightest discomfort or embarrassment. In Hebrew, I said to him, "In the beginning, God created," reciting a long passage. I continued the conversation on the same subject, without letting him notice that he was being tested. At a certain moment, I pretended to forget. I began speaking in Hebrew. "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." And then I asked him, "What's the rest?" He completed,
Think not that I came to destroy the laws or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill.
I spoke to him in English and Greek as well. He responded perfectly to everything. Not only did he know the languages, but he was also able to delve deep into the topics I referred to, citing dates, places, historical events, and the names of key figures. He only occasionally offered an interpretation that differed from our orthodox viewpoint. His speech seemed to me to falter only when he expressed in English. However, the proficiency with which he discussed the most diverse issues left me perplexed. Returning to the living room, I wanted to gauge the extent of his scientific knowledge, because it's one thing to discuss religious and historical matters and to possess a gift for languages, but quite another to discuss science. Logically, speaking of science, he should not only possess the knowledge we have but present something more advanced. Otherwise, he would reveal himself to be an inhabitant of Earth. After all, no one improvises theories unless they are a genius or unless the theories lack logic. "What is your name?" I asked him.
I do not have a name in the same sense that you apply. On my planet, names are a portrait of an individual's character. Through it, we know the virtues and flaws of a person, even if they are largely unknown. It's a combination of sounds, unintelligible to you, where no two are alike. Today I have one name. If tomorrow I become wiser or better, I will have another, and so on.
"Let it be," I agreed. "But tell me, where do you come from?"
I come from a satellite of Jupiter.
"Which satellite?" I asked.
None in particular. I live on Ganymede as well as on Io. It's like you who can reside in São Paulo, or in Santos, or Guarujá at the same time.
"But I've heard that interplanetary beings are tiny, and you are quite tall, almost 2 meters. How do you explain that?" I asked him, intending to embarrass him.
Not all are tiny. On the same satellite, we have small and large men, blondes, blacks, or browns. Earthlings too are tall, but there are pygmies, average types, blondes, redheads, brunettes, blacks. In diversity, nature presents its unity.
Then I said, "That's not important. You know the lion by its claws. You must be aware of the prodigious effort we make to learn something. We spend fabulous sums on research, and not always with encouraging results. I myself, as you can see from my books full of annotations, study a lot, but, to this day, I know nothing. I get lost in the maze of equations, and the mere introduction of a parameter into the calculation makes me dizzy. There is a problem, for example, that has consumed the phosphate of our best physicists and mathematicians, which I believe to be easy for you, whose science allows traversing spaces. It's about determining whether what exists in nature is energy or matter. Clearly, I won't be satisfied with a simple academic definition without a more profound explanation, especially since it's coming from someone who must know a great deal about the subject. Could you tell me?" The commander of the disc seemed to dive his thoughts into a distant point, as if searching for a simple way to approach the subject, or trying to hear someone speaking to the depths of his soul. After that, he started a long discourse. Since this chapter primarily aims to explain to the reader how we managed to start a high-level conversation with the commander of a flying saucer, we prefer to end it at this point, resuming the topic in the next chapter. The following pages do not represent the outcome of a single discourse, but rather the consequence of 5 meetings we had, which took place in the following locations: once on the disc itself, once at my residence, twice in Praça da República, and a last one at Roosevelt Station. It's also important to clarify that the 2 discourses we had at Praça da República were attended by a professor of physics and mathematics, whose anonymity we preserve here, respecting their current high position. It's possible that many answers may not represent the true spirit of the disk commander. Due to the passage of time, it's likely that we might have distorted something. However, we have kept the essence of the responses, basing them on notes made at the time. However, in the part pertaining to religion, we sought to exclude much that might offend the viewpoints of existing sects or churches.
Your question was poorly formulated. You should first inquire about the origin of matter and energy, since both are expressions of something else that you see and feel, but do not perceive.
Are you referring to the ether?
Absolutely not. I am not referring to the ether. Ether only exists around planets up to a certain height, and is nothing more than a form of matter. The etheric layers are still in effect, not the cause. However, lacking the fundamental elements, it would be difficult for me to be explicit. That is, I lack the elements because you reason differently. I do not have the appropriate terms in your language.
Which elements are you referring to? Mathematical ones?
I would rather say theological.
I asked him, what do matter and energy have to do with theology?
The man can only truly understand the phenomena of nature when he understands the nature of God.
Well, I have never been able to believe in God, precisely because I do not see what role he would have to play in the universe. If he existed and governed the infinite, the main role of the play should be reserved for him. However, it always seemed to me that there is no arbitrary principle influencing the general order that could be said to be superior to everything that exists because the matter, energy, the movement of bodies. In short, everything is molded into defined laws, we might say of mechanical order. It remains for you to tell me what he is what his nature is, what he is composed of, what his attributes are, how he acts and operates in things, and demonstrate to me that God is not merely a decorative figurehead. Do not show me a God submissive to mechanical laws, which I could never believe. Reveal to me a God with a capital G, superior to the laws. If he is subordinate to these same laws, whoever subordinates him is superior, and if the laws have an imperative over him, now the divine attributes belong to him, and God is a mere vassal. Subject to laws, I am also, and I am not God.
In your skepticism, there is truth. I too would never believe in a God submissive to things and the natural order. A law is merely a convention and always presupposes someone who legislated it. Now the Creator is superior to the created thing. Hence, he is the judge who judges the law. It is an arbitrary principle when arbitrariness becomes necessary for the good of the law itself and the created things. But the very creation is already superior to the law, since a legal statute is meant to support. It is good for the protection of the creature. But if instead of protecting it becomes an opprobrium, the legislator has the power to modify it at will. God judges and is not judged nor subject to anything. I will tell you what I think of God, giving you a definition as easy and simplified as possible. God is an isotropic line parallel to itself and vibrating on itself at a 90-degree angle. It's like a Cartesian coordinate system whose intersection point of the lines is everywhere at the same time. Therefore, he is multiple within himself because he contains dimensions. To use a terrestrial definition, that, when countervaried, n, would be equal to infinity. Remember, this is an attempt to explain what is inexplicable in human language. Having grasped this premise, we can now go further and study how matter and energy were created.
You say created?
I say created because there was a time when they did not exist. If they had existed for all eternity, they would have coexisted with God, and the Father could not have been the creator of something as eternal as himself. Then we would say transformer. God made them. The how is what we are going to study. Let's start with a small example. Your attention must have already been drawn to an interesting peculiarity of electricity. If within a magnetic field formed by a magnet, we rotate a rotor, we immediately obtain a flow of electrons, which propagates through the surface of the conductor. I ask you, where did these electrons come from? They must have come from somewhere. Where? And I answer it for you. They did not come from anywhere. They were generated inside the magnetic field. How were they generated? As a consequence of a deformation caused in the magnetic field by the rotation of the rotor. Even if we took that generator and enclosed it within a container where atmospheric air could neither enter nor exit, the moment we rotated the rotor, we would continue obtaining the flow of electrons. And if we had measured the internal pressure of the container, we would see, after some time, that notwithstanding the enormous potential that flowed through the conductors, the atmospheric pressure remained unchanged. If so, we can define the electron as a deformed magnetic space, which propagates in a wave-like form. There is an experiment conducted by Earth scientists, which clearly demonstrates this truth. When a gamma ray is passed to an atomic nucleus, given that the gamma ray is electromagnetic in nature, an electron immediately emerges. It's true that the moment of inertia of the gamma ray undergoes alteration. As explanations for this phenomenon, the hypothesis was formulated, albeit a very fragile one, that acceleration transforms into energy, but it's mere nonsense to believe that the moment of inertia of a vector in space can be transformed into energy. There exists a correspondence between the force that accelerates a mass and energy, but only a correspondence. If it is absurd to say that a vectorial moment creates energy, it would be even worse if we said that this moment generated matter, if the electron were corpuscular. The only rational explanation is that the gamma ray, being of electromagnetic wave nature, deformed for a moment near the nucleus, and from this deformation the electron emerged, which is, therefore, of a wave nature and propagates as a wave.
But if the gamma ray, by not becoming deformed, creates the electron, something must have come out of it, and its mass must have decreased.
The gamma ray lost nothing, except its frequency and its wavelength, in part. However, it can be said that if we can create obstacles to its passage, using atomic nuclei, we would correspondingly create as many electrons as its frequency. Incidentally, this system is widely used by us to obtain energy, about which we will talk later.
Your reasoning is very interesting. One can even admit the electron as an electromagnetic wave. But how to reconcile the wave nature of the electron with the constitution of the atom? Can waves rotate around a nucleus?
If waves can't, particles even less so. The laws of physics are immutable. We have in thermodynamics the first law, called the mechanical equivalent of heat. For a body to perform work, an equivalent amount of energy is required. Once this is exhausted, the mechanical movement ceases. If the electron were a particle, however much energy it had, it would be limited. Thus, in rotating around a nucleus, this energy would cease to exist in a short time. However, this is not the case, as the movement or the permanence of the electron in its orbit around the atomic nucleus defies time and thermodynamics. Let's go further. If the electron were a particle, its high speed would make it escape through the tangent of the atom due to centrifugal force. We must also consider that a body, no matter how much energy it intrinsically contains, does not move if an external force does not force it to do so. Here's an example. Charge a sphere with a large amount of energy, and it will not move by itself. However, you apply to it the force of 1 gram, and it will have a corresponding impulse. all the intrinsic energy of the electron, if it were a particle, would be useless if there wasn't an external force to lend acceleration to its mass. Having the character of a wave, however, the electron perpetuates its vibration within a field without losing its characteristic wavelength. Waves have the property of transporting themselves, or remaining stationary in the field. Therefore, the electron exists in the atom as a stationary wave. Werner Heisenberg once encountered certain difficulties in understanding the movement of the electron in the atom. He observed that the tiny electrons seemed to possess the gift of ubiquity, being at the same time at all points of an orbit. Unable to determine the point in space where this element was located at a certain time because it was in all of them, he created the uncertainty principle. Thus, the so-called KLME orbits are nothing more than electronic waves stationary in a field, with different wavelengths and frequencies among them. It is known that waves of various lengths do not interfere, as is the case with radio waves, even though they occupy the same space. In this particularity of the electron lies a fabulous field, waiting to be explored for the benefit of man in almost all branches of knowledge. Being the electron a wave of variable length, we can give it characteristics in almost unlimited numbers. Another very simple example: turn on your television and provoke interference from shortwave radio, and you will see how the images transform into negatives. Do it on very short waves, and you will obtain even more interesting phenomena. Now, if the beam of electrons that gives the image to the television can be deformed and undergo a complete inversion of characteristics, making white become black and black become white, it is evident that a particle could never undergo such an effect. Abandon the concept of wave nature, and we will not even have an explanation for molecular cohesion.
You say that a body or a particle cannot indefinitely continue a motion in space because it loses energy. You also say that every body requires an external force to accelerate it. Asserting Newtonian physics, that all bodies can be considered as a point in space, and considering then that the planet Earth is just a point, we have two movements that negate your theory. The first is the Earth's rotational movement, and the second is the revolution that our planet makes around the Sun.
Absolutely. The case of planet Earth is different and quite simple. The analogy that physicists wanted to see between the movements of stars and planets and interatomic movement does not exist. In the atom, we have stationary waves in a permanent vibratory state. The Earth is a body driven by concurrent and constant forces. Even if it had no intrinsic energy, it would still move in space. What happens with it is similar to what occurs with a radiometer. In the radiometer, the blades have one white side and one black side which, when struck by sunlight, undergo a difference in potential. As the black sides of the blades absorb solar light and the white sides absorb much less, a difference in heat is created, and they start rotating around their axis. The intensity of the movement depends on the intensity of solar light that the black sides can retain. Notice that in the radiometer, it is necessary to create low pressure inside it. Otherwise, the blades do not rotate. The Earth also, having an illuminated side and the other in darkness, is caught by a difference in potential, or better said, a binary force, and rotates around its axis. The Earth has in its high layers at great altitudes the necessary low pressure, which extends to the vacuum. It was good that you referred to Earth's rotation, because later When we refer to the translation, this knowledge will be extremely valuable. Continuing the explanation of how rotation occurs, I can assure you that this phenomenon will be one of the stumbling blocks you will face when you make the first interplanetary trips. If any body rises to a certain height from Earth in such a way that atmospheric pressure decreases, it immediately starts rotating. This is due to having one side receiving more light and heat than the opposite side to the sun, that is, the shadow. We say that God, being an isotropic line, is a system of axes from which lines emanate infinitely in all directions, whether in the infinitely large or the infinitely small. As the center of this axis is everywhere, we can consider that the entire universe is the center, and that the lines of force not being able to propagate outside of God or move away from the center make him an immanent figure. Thus, if the lines do not go outward, they can only propagate inward. But there being no inside or outside, the entire universe being a center of lines of force, all the lines resulting from the isotropism of God would be vibrating over a point. Let's call therefore the universe an infinite vibrating point. The superposition of force lines on a point is a deformation. If the universe is thus well defined, God is a vibrating charge on an infinite point, eternally deforming space, acting on nothingness, automatically creating energy and, consequently, matter. Were it not for God, nothing would exist. I could continue this demonstration to a high degree, but those not accustomed might suffer from vertigo of heights. Let's stop here for now. From this continuous creation of energy in the universe results a pressure among the spiral nebulae, or rather, the galaxies, which is observed in the phenomenon called spiral nebular escape. Suffering pressure among themselves, they move apart. You might object that this pressure also exists in the direction of escape, and thus an internal and external pressure would give them stability, and they would not move apart, causing the crushing of mass. But to this, I would reply that the energy created outside a galaxy tends to enter it, condensing into material form. Thus, we have internal pressure and external decompression. Also, there is the flight of the spiral nebulae, or rather, the galaxies, which prevents crushing for 3 reasons. Number 1, with the flight itself, the internal pressure disappears. Number 2, as the galaxies flee, the space that had been transformed into energy and then into matter seeks to return to its original position as primitive space in a law of rotation of masses in a magnetic field, restoring the energy of condensation into matter now in the form of light, whose wavelength falls until it suffers the effect of entropy. This is the phenomenon of the sun. Its discharges and emissions of light into space, omitting the reactions they provoke on each planet, are a kind of return of matter into energy and finally to the state of primitive space. Number 3, solar light repels magnetic fields. Solar light, consequent to the multitude of suns from various galaxies, exerts a great repulsive force on all the matter of the spiral nebulae, or rather said, the galaxies, and under this repulsive force, they move apart from each other. As for this repulsive force of solar light, we will talk later. Having God provided the force of vibration and deformation of space, the sun makes restitution in the opposite direction. Everything comes from God, and to Him everything returns. Here is explained why there is no matter or energy, but only deformed space called matter, with what you call energy being merely a phenomenon of transition between primitive and deformed space.
I assure you, my friend, that I do not have the elements to refute your theory, but I immensely enjoyed your explanation. You told me you would talk about the Earth's translational movement in space. I would like to hear it.
The translation is partly a consequence of rotation. Note, however, that I say in part because to explain it, we must consider something more about the Sun. For terrestrial science, the Sun is the center of the planetary system, which is not true. The Milky Way is an immense magnetic field. However, within a field, there are other secondary fields. For example, the Earth has a magnetic field that is within the magnetic field of our solar system, and this in turn is within the Milky Way. On Earth, there are also secondary magnetic fields besides the poles, but unfortunately, they have not yet been discovered by terrestrials. The central point of the magnetic field of our solar system has been mathematically demonstrated by Herschel and Newton when they found the system's point of equilibrium. This point is 3 times the Sun's diameter away due to the 1/700 mass ratio of the planets to the Sun. It makes a translational movement around this point. It is important to emphasize that it is false to say that matter attracts matter directly in proportion to the masses and inversely to the square of the distances. The matter, having undergone atomic interaction, becomes neutral to other distant matter. However, magnetic fields attract or repel each other, and even matter can be attracted by a field. The Earth is attracted to this magnetic point of our system, which we can call the 0 point. At the same time that this point attracts it, it is repelled by the sunlight, balancing in its orbit between the action of 2 competing forces, attraction and repulsion.
Repelled by sunlight.
Yes, and repelled. The same repulsion that galaxies suffer, causing them to flee from each other. This same force also acts on the Earth and the other planets. Hasn't the weight of light been measured? What is light pressure, if not a pressure that it constantly exerts on matter? Well, a body in space can only have a state of equilibrium if 2 opposite forces compete for its support. If there were only the force of attraction without another of repulsion, the planet would come into contact with the point of attraction. It has also been demonstrated that if the repulsion were caused by centrifugal force, the planet would describe a spiral movement until it collided with the origin of the attraction. See, it is terrestrial mathematics itself that affirms this. However, if there were no repulsive force of sunlight, there would not even be circular motion. There would be no rotation or translation. To understand the phenomenon of revolution, we must consider the true diameter of the planet, not just given by its solid mass, but by the sum of solid and gaseous parts. For example, your planet develops a rotation speed at the equator of 1,660 kilometers per hour and a revolution speed of approximately 106,000 kilometers per hour. This means that the radius of the bordering gaseous mass is 407,200 kilometers. That is, if you discount the Earth's radius, the terrestrial ether rises to a height of 400,822 kilometers, as can be inferred from the following formula for the radius of the ethereal layer. The total radius of the Earth is equal to the product of the equatorial radius and the speed of translation, divided by the speed of rotation. Discounting the terrestrial radius, which is equal to 6,378 kilometers, we have 400,822 kilometers, which is where the limit of the Earth's ethereal layer is reached. The Moon is located, therefore, in the peripheral zone of the ether layer, where various phenomena pertinent to it occur. The support point that the ether offers to the Earth constitutes the plane on the vertex of two competing forces. We then have that the planet's diameter, for the purpose of revolution, is 814,400 kilometers. The whole set moves with angular velocity, supported by competing forces, on a plane. It's like a wheel, which, spinning supported on the ground, moves. We see then that the same force that causes rotation operates the body's translation in space. In the case of the Earth, the force of rotation occurs on the solid surface, distant from the axis by 6,378 kilometers, but the effect of translation happens 407,200 kilometers from the axis, where the ether's surface develops a speed of 106,000 kilometers per hour. With this, we can explain why a planet of large volume is located at a point distant from the Sun. Considering the distance at which it is located and its volume, we discover its true density, since this property is associated with the magnetic power of the poles. Therefore, the planet Jupiter has a low density because, having a large diameter and consequently large volume, it is repelled more and attracted less. If it were true that matter attracts matter directly in proportion to the masses and inversely to the square of the distance, Jupiter, having a volume 1,300 times larger than Earth and supposedly 331 times more mass, should be much closer to the Sun than this planet. Once the rotation and translation of the body are considered, it is known the gaseous mass that surrounds the planet, which generally cannot be observed by telescopes. With this system, you now have the reason why bodies describe ellipses in space. It's the three-body problem, which terrestrial mathematics has not yet found a formula to equate, in which 18 unknowns intervene. If a solution to the three-body problem has not yet been found, imagine an equation for the entire system with 8, 9, 10 bodies and the number of unknowns that arise. However, there is a solution, and the demonstration is easy. This problem becomes complicated when considering the amount of own light contained in each planet.
So I asked, surprised, own light? So, do planets have light?
Every rotating body, surrounded by an atmosphere, has a quantity of own light. The Earth has what physicists call a permanent aurora. It is a greenish light, found in the high layers, invisible to the naked eye if the observer's point of view is from the surface. It is the result of the short circuit caused by the pole's discharges in the high atmosphere, where hydrogen, sodium, and oxygen are found. A rotating body in space, being immersed in the magnetic field of the solar system, acts as a rotor, generating a certain degree of electricity. The intensity of the poles depends on the rotation of this body. In this case, we take the diameter, the mass, the distance between the poles, and the atmospheric analysis of the planet and equate, collecting from these equated elements, the intensity of the short circuit and, consequently, the quantity of own light generated, which, in turn, will interfere in the body's own movement of rotation and translation. Thus, rotation is the result of the planet's distance to the Sun, which will provide the intensity of solar light, of the diameter it presents, which will provide the volume, of the mass of the satellites that illuminate its surface, minus the own light generated. It is also the aurora borealis, whose elucidation has given so much work to scholars. Its intensity is a consequence of the proximity of the magnetic pole and the geographic pole.
I asked, is there any concrete proof that light repels matter?
Various proofs exist. Let's look at some. First, a comet, when approaching the Sun, undergoes the phenomenon of flattening. Second, solar light is deflected when approaching a magnetic field, not mass. Also, the electron, when crossing a field, is deflected. Third, the planet Jupiter, with its approach to the Sun, exerts pressure against it and moves it from its position. Fourth, light has weight and friction. Fifth, solar luminosity causes barometric pressure. Sixth, At aphelion, that is, at the orbit's farthest point from the Sun, the planets have a lower speed. At perihelion, which is the closest point, they have a higher speed. 7th, the pressure of solar light on Mercury, which is the planet closest to the Sun, makes it move away 23 million kilometers. Of all the planets, it has the highest eccentricity. We could cite other proofs, but it is convenient that we abstain from not having yet talked about other phenomena. Soon terrestrials will have other problems to solve. If until now there is no solution for the three-body problem, soon there will be more difficulty with the inclusion of another sun in our system. Now there are 3. Later there will be 4 bodies, represented by the Earth, 2 suns, and the magnetic center.
So I asked in surprise, I don't quite understand what you are referring to. What other sun is this that will be part of our system? I'm not quite understanding what you're referring to. What other sun is this that will become part of our system?
That's what I'm telling you. Another second sun will soon penetrate our planetary system, and we will have an enviable system of dual suns. Moreover, this is one of the reasons why we are here. Besides coming to warn you, it's against the dangers you are exposed to with the advent of the atomic era, and to greet you.
Yes, I want to know what dangers we are exposed to with the advent of the atomic era. But first, it would be interesting to hear more about this new sun.
The celestial body is a monster, which will soon be seen in the direction of the constellation of Cancer with dim light. The light of a sun only starts to shine when it enters a secondary magnetic field like ours. Entering the planetary system, it takes a rotational movement, deforms space, and generates currents that will give it brightness. If it came luminous from outside the system, its light would cause strong repulsion and would be diverted from its path. However, without brightness, it undergoes the pressure of our sun, but its kinetic moment will guarantee its penetration. Initially, it will be a reddish light, then blue. After overcoming the zone of the large planetary masses, it will face solar opposition, but in the rear, it will have the weight of the large masses to propel it through a repulsive action. The repulsion against the planets, from the rear, its shining light, and the volume of its enormous mass will make the current sun move away from the vicinity of the magnetic center, situating itself further away. Then the 2 suns will mark their orbits, with the one of greater mass and less light closer to the center. 2 suns in the system will create difficult problems. All the planets will have their orbits modified. Mercury will fall into the zone today understood between Venus and Earth. Venus will go to the place between Earth and Mars. The Earth will feel the effect before the new sun takes its definitive place. Under the combined pressure of 2 suns, it will be situated in the zone today occupied by the asteroids between Mars and Jupiter. In short, there will be a general displacement of all the bodies that populate our system. Then everything will normalize. We will have a new sky to travel through, and you, a new Earth.
I asked to him, when will this be? Will it still take a long time?
It will be very soon, by the end of this century. The Earth will begin its new millennium with a new source of light to illuminate its meadows. Many will disappear forever from the earthly scene, but a small flock will remain, obedient to God's laws, and there will be no more tears that exist here. There will be peace and abundance, justice and mercy. Unjust souls will receive their deserved punishment, and only the good will find shelter. On that day, man will understand the triumph of the righteous and see why God did not immediately punish the wicked. And the Son that is to come will be called the Son of Justice.
So I asked him, and what does the coming of the disks to Earth have to do with the sun that is to come?
We study all the effects that its appearance will bring. If we were allowed, we could send on through appropriate devices electromagnetic pulses against it, and we would prevent its entry, making its light ignite outside the system. But preventing its coming would mean opposing God's will and allowing injustice here to perpetuate. Those who are at peace with their conscience and with the Creator have nothing to fear. Let it come. We came with the purpose of study and also to make a supreme appeal to man, to avoid catastrophe and then live in peace. The Earth is not the center of the planetary system, as previously thought, but it is the center of evil. If men became good, perhaps the Creator would have compassion. Avoid war, because it may happen that man destroys his planet with his own hands, thus preventing that the forces of nature do it. It's not difficult to be good. It's enough not to do evil. The rest God will provide.
Is there any inconvenience in clarifying the issues related to flying saucer navigation and how they work?
Absolutely none. Of course, manned interplanetary travel would still take a long time for the people of Earth. But let's give you a hand, showing you how things happen. For travels within the atmospheres of planets, the secret lies in using atmospheric pressure to our advantage. The atmospheric pressure of Earth is 1.033 kilograms force per square centimeter. An example of the influence of this pressure is if we place a sheet of paper over the mouth of a full glass of water, upside down, the atmospheric pressure, exerted from below upwards, will prevent the water from being affected by gravity and falling. With the flying saucer, we employ this natural force of the atmosphere. It is what gives us the needed propulsion. If we maintain this pressure on the lower part of the saucer and provoke a decompression on the top part, the device will experience a fabulous upward thrust with a power that no known force can match.
I asked, still not understanding. Please, could you be more explicit? I'm not quite understanding the system as you describe.
It's simple, my friend. We create a vacuum in the direction we wish to go. If we have low pressure on one side, on the other we obtain the full atmospheric pressure. Any device, whatever it is, can only move by obtaining a potential difference. For example, in a saucer with a 20-meter diameter, we have, in a simplified form, the surface area of half the disk of the area A is equal to the radius squared multiplied by p, where the radius is 10 meters multiplied by PS, with the value approximately equal to 3.1416. That is, 10 meters squared multiplied by P is approximately equal to 3,141,600 square centimeters. Considering now that for each square centimeter, there is an atmospheric pressure equal to 1.033 kilograms force, we conclude that the force acting on the saucer is 3,278,272.8 kilograms force, K now, when its dimensions correspond to 20 meters in diameter, so that the force is equal to the area multiplied by the pressure, in which the area is equal to 3,141,600 square centimeters, and the pressure is equal to 1.033 kilograms force per square centimeter. Therefore, the total force is 328,272.8 kilograms force. To give you an idea of what this represents, imagine that, in one of the smaller disks, which are 20 meters in diameter and fully equipped weigh at most 250 tons, we have an impulse of 3 million kilograms of force. While the most powerful terrestrial planes do not go beyond a few thousand kilograms. In a regularly sized device, this pressure is much greater. For a disk of 100 meters in diameter, we would have 78 million kilograms. In one of 200 meters, the pressure would be equal to 314 million kilograms. There is no limit to the size and capacity of one of these devices. Our large freighters reach up to 600 meters in diameter with a capacity for almost 3 billion kilograms. This is more or less theoretical because we never use the full load capacity of one of these space giants. We always leave a margin, which we use for high speed. No one would ever obtain such energy in a ship. Not even atomic energy could compare to the forces of nature, and this without poisoning the atmosphere. Do you understand now?
So I said, surprised in an affirmative way. I understand. It's amazing how easy the process is.
Yes, ain't it as easy? It's like Columbus's egg. But it would be incomplete if I refused to tell you the means we use to create the vacuum externally. But before, I explain the steering system. We can transfer this vacuum in any direction. With a simple lever on a hemisphere, we transfer it to where we want to go. If we want to go one way, we create a vacuum in that direction, and immediately the atmosphere exerts pressure in that direction. Let's say we are flying in the horizontal plane. If we want to make a 90-degree angles, we just transfer the vacuum upward or to one side, and we will go at the same speed in that direction. No need for a curve. Do you understand?
I responded to him amazed. Yes, I see the whole scope. This could revolutionize everything we know about navigation. It's a devilish device.
It depends on the use made of it. I still believe in the goodness of man and commit myself as, if one day they promise to end wars, to come personally and help them achieve this goal. Not only that, but much more superior things. I will teach you how to make life a paradise. But as we were saying, we obtain a vacuum and a pressure, as you say, is devilish. However, we have no friction since in the direction we are going there is only a vacuum. Therefore, without friction, the device does not heat up. We often even need a bit of heat to keep us warm because the temperature is too low. As I said, the explanation would be incomplete if I refused to tell you the means we use to create the vacuum externally to the device. However, there is no technical difficulty whatsoever, and I will explain to you. You know that the cathode rays have the strange property of decomposing the atmosphere through which they pass. The atmospheric elements, under the action of these rays, return to the ethereal state. To this property, We add that of making the cathode rays intersect with the anodic ones at a 45-degree angle. We achieve this by employing high voltage and amperage.
I asked him, where is the cathode ray emitter located?
In the entire peripheral zone of the disc. That is, the entire lateral part of the device is a ray tube between two walls. These rays are deadly and can only be projected outward. A human being who received the emission of cathode rays with the intensity we use would have all their blood cells destroyed and suffer fatal burns. However, we have the appropriate means so that inside the device there is less radioactivity than the air breathed on Earth. The coloration you see is a consequence of these rays, like in a Crookes and Geisler tube. It depends on the low pressure we obtain. If we want to go fast, we make an absolute vacuum and become a ray in space. If not, we make a semi-vacuum and go slowly, proportionally. The intensity of the vacuum is achieved with the amperage used, using a rheostat. If we want to float, we use a weak current. When we are with a semi-vacuum, you see the luminosity at night. But if we are using an absolute vacuum, no one sees us. That's why they always say we stay still and suddenly disappear and appear in another place. It must be confessed that there are other means employed, as in the case of the bismuth system, still used in many devices to achieve a potential difference. Indeed, that was our first system. After traveling a lot with the bismuth jalopy, a being from another planet explained to us how we could do things more simply. We still have devices of this type, but they are only used by antiquity aficionados who venture on interplanetary trips. They are like you who, having motorboats, sportingly use sailboats. There you have it, my friend, how you can make a device in as faster than lightning.
I said to him with a question. I completely accept the explanation you gave. Clearly, a device that could create an external vacuum would have great maneuverability, motor, and traction force. However, it seems to me that this system would not be very good for leaving Earth. It is easy to handle as long as there is atmospheric pressure. But, at a certain height, unless our calculations are fundamentally wrong, this pressure reduces to nothing. I would like you to speak frankly about the method you use to escape Earth, because what you have talked about so far is only part of the answer. Could I report this to others?
I did not impose conditions to tell you anything. Do as you please. I cannot forbid you from telling others things that can contribute to collective well-being. I ask that you keep the information I give you about means of destruction to yourself only. As for the rest, if you think it is fair to tell others, do so. Friendship does not impose conditions, and generosity should be our universal emblem, Ritzer. We are all susceptible to imperfections, and when one sincerely esteems, one believes in the character of the person, even if one should not. I also ask you, if one day you want to turn this into something useful for the world, first communicate it to your people, because Brazilians are not aggressive and inherently abhor war. Do not try to clarify the issue, however, to those who can turn such a device into a weapon of mass killing. But if your people do not give it importance, publish as you wish. But do it then, without restrictions, so that everyone knows and no one has an advantage over the other.
Does it require a considerable amount of electrical energy to generate the necessary propulsion for liftoff?
It's all relative. In our disk, the voltage and amperage are exceedingly high. In a smaller device, for research purposes, a minimal current would suffice.
I asked him, from where do you obtain the energy to initiate such an effect?
We have several methods of acquisition. It could be through the transformation of hydrogen into helium at low temperatures, bombarding deuterium with heavier mesons, producing a tremendous energy potential. Or we use ultra-rays in an acidulated solution, saturated with helium nuclei, as I mentioned to you before. This modality is the most utilized.
So I asked him, how does this phenomenon of transforming ultra-rays into usable energy occur?
If you make radioactivity pass through a magnetic field, you will obtain alpha, beta, and gamma rays. The first are helium nuclei, the second are electrons, and the third are gamma rays, which are of the same nature as ultra-rays, that is, electromagnetic energy. These three components of radioactivity are akin to each other. Ultra-rays, or gamma rays, upon passing successively through various helium nuclei, warp space, and create electrons until their wavelength falls. Thus, when gamma rays traverse an acidulated solution saturated with helium nuclei, they generate electrons near the nuclei. Still, these are prevented from uniting with other helium nuclei due to the acidic presence, and are condensed on the plates located at the bottom of the device, from where we absorb it. Here lies an inexhaustible source of energy that costs nothing, except for a bit of acidic solution and helium nuclei. However, we have other resources. In an interplanetary journey, there might be a mishap in the hydrogen to helium transformation systems and gamma ray capture. If that happens, we resort to solar energy. We make it pass through a carbon gas tube. This gas, in the presence of a catalyst, combines with water, transforming into formic aldehyde, also known as formaldehyde. Then, we oxidize this product, obtaining carbon gas, and water again. In this second process, solar energy is restored in the form of a usable current, perfectly meeting our immediate needs, since in interplanetary travels, we do not require propulsive energy for the device. The laws of inertia in space ensure the necessary impulse until we reach our targeted planet.
At that time I asked him, so the entire device boils down to this?
The movement of the device, yes. Besides propulsion, we have multiple navigation instruments, as you've seen. It's akin to one day explaining to someone how a jet plane moves. Naturally, you'd explain that it experiences a thrust at the back of the turbine, propelling it forward. True, but inside the plane, there's a plethora of navigational aids. If I were to explain just our mechanism for detecting etheric layers, we'd be talking for about 3 hours. The interplanetary communication instrument is also complex, though based on principles well known to you, yet unapplied. The best advancements are still found in the simplest scientific questions. In science, we need to seek discovery, though everything seems discovered. The secret is to keep a level head, free from the whims of tensors. With a tensor, you can explain a phenomenon, but you do not discover it. Inserting tensors into calculations complicates what is easy. What use are tensors in demonstrating that a potential difference between atmospheric pressure and vacuum can produce a thrust? Once discovered, No further demonstration is needed. The device proves itself. The rest is academic pedantry. Yet terrestrial science, to maintain a monopoly for some, does not admit anything without a mathematical demonstration. In a world where everything remains to be done, this stifles research. Many brilliant ideas, I assure you, once were buried, simply because their originators lacked the mathematical culture for a demonstration.
It was then that I told him we had assumed, until now, that the disk merely neutralized gravity.
You assumed something non-existent. Gravity is but a misinterpretation of a set of phenomena, not a single attribute.
At that time, I questioned him. How so? Isn't gravity caused by the attraction of mass?
Not at all. What your science calls gravity, observed daily by you, is a conglomeration of 5 factors. Let's be clear. Your cigarette smoke is heavier than atmospheric air, yet it rises. This is due to heat, meaning the density difference between the air and smoke is offset by the smoke's temperature. Thus, we identify 2 factors influencing the phenomenon, density and temperature. It's observed that a balloon filled with hydrogen gas rises depending on the gas volume. The same happens with helium. This means that less dense bodies always tend to rise, just as water and oil separate due to density. If the body is less dense, no gravity can prevent it from rising. While in the air, because it is of low density, heavy objects fall quickly. In water, which is denser than air, they fall more slowly. The third factor, influencing gravity, is the atmospheric and etheric mass surrounding the planet. Yet, we can still categorize it under the density factor. It's incorrect, then, to attribute a planet's greater or lesser gravity if we're unaware of its gaseous mass thickness and atmospheric density. The fourth and most significant factor influencing gravity is the vertical component of magnetism. The magnetic attraction Earth exerts on a body is, with slight variance, equal to that on any other body. Hence, the same falling velocity is observed in a vacuum. But this attraction is not due to mass, but rather due to the magnetism with which every body is endowed. Lastly, the fifth factor is the tremendous energy vibrating the entire universe, penetrating the galactic systems I spoke of earlier. A body cannot be pressured from all directions, because Earth always blocks the pressure from one side. The body experiences a force difference acting upon it and falls to Earth. This tremendous universal pressure, the result of God's vibration, on the universe's infinitesimal point, maintains the planet's atmospheres. If atmospheric pressure possesses the fabulous power we use to move the disks, and if gases always tend to expand indefinitely, the entire gaseous layer surrounding the planet would expand into the vacuum, if not for a constant pressure maintaining it. When Newton witnessed the apple fall, he couldn't suspect that he was observing the effect of divine presence in the universe. Hence, we live and move in God. Gravity, then, is a collection of phenomena, never an individualized force.
Then, I advanced with the questions for him. Why does heat influence gravity?
Because it diminishes the magnetic intensity of bodies. Notice that a magnet loses its property with heat. Since matter consists of standing waves, heat significantly influences them. Increasing these waves' frequency, upon absorbing heat, they begin to emit light. Moreover, it's a well-known phenomenon that heat makes a body less dense. Thus, it always tends to rise. In boiling water, this is most evident. The warmer water seeks to rise above the cooler, hence in the oceans creating marine currents. We pinpoint heat as a factor influencing gravity, not because it provokes gravitational phenomena, but because it affects magnetism and density.
Does this mean that our science is mistaken?
Yes, it is profoundly mistaken.
From that moment on, I asked, then, does our entire understanding of physics fall, including relativity?
The incorrect parts fall away. Many others, the correct ones, will remain. Is it surprising that this happens? Ptolemy was a genius, yet his entire system crumbled spectacularly, like a house of cards. The same occurred with Aristotle. Isaac Newton's turn came with relativistic physics, and its days were numbered.
Since that moment, I asked, but the relativity provided an explanation for the perturbation in Mercury's orbit.
Anyone can offer explanations. The question is whether it's rational. Even if it is rational, we need to see if that's the method nature uses in its phenomena, because we can propose 1,000 rational hypotheses, yet nature will utilize only one, disregarding the rationality of the 999, and might not even prefer any of them. Relativity is based on certain erroneous elements that can't even be considered rational, and which nature, in the words of James Jeans, seems to ignore. For example, classical mechanics states that if two bodies move in the same direction at the same speed, the velocity between them would be null. But if they move in opposite directions, the velocity of one relative to the other would be 2v. However, to accommodate some difficulties of his system, Einstein asserted that whether the bodies move in one direction or the other, the velocity between them would always be v. It doesn't take much imagination to see that this principle is false. To explain a fantasy, the author of Relativity created an even bigger one. He attributed to each moving body its own space and time, according to velocity. But as one error leads to a greater one, he had to concoct a third fantasy. Now, to justify the second, he placed boundaries on the universe, delineating a particular space for us. But Astronavigation nature is unaware of imaginary fences, disregards our desire for the universe to conform to our viewpoints, and is oblivious to Hamiltonian functions and the seriousness with which Earthlings have lent to tensors. Soon you'll see that the boundaries proposed by Einstein were too narrow to contain what is inherently infinite. Space is one, and time is nothing. It is merely a convention based on the movement of celestial bodies. It's merely an effect. If the movement of a body, that is, the acceleration of mass, is due to force, then time would be an effect of force, and this, the cause. But if the force varies and is consumed, variable would be the time. Now, since space is a constant, it's hard to imagine how you could create a space-time continuum, and even more so, to consider it a dimension. The fact is, nature is unaware of these things. If we multiply two dimensions, we get a square. If we multiply the square area by height, we get the volume of the body. Now, if we multiply this volume by a fourth dimension, we only get an absurdity. In space, a body doesn't propagate in 4, 3, 2, or 1 dimension, because space, being infinite, has no dimension at all. At most, we can say that a body follows a tensorial direction when it moves, going from point A to point B. To a certain extent, Einstein was right to say that a body moving in space has its own time, because leaving Earth changes what has been conventionally called earthly time. But he was wrong, because time is calculated based on the duration of its movement until a point of the mass returns to the same place. Thus, time is the result of spherical movement. However, he was more mistaken when he thought there was a specific and particular space for each moving body. The advancement of Mercury's perihelion, which made him famous, is a matter of proximity to the Sun. Being closer, it receives more light, rotates more rapidly, and advances faster through space.
Then after that, I questioned him. Well, what about the curvature of light from a star, observed by Sir Arthur Eddington on the island of Principe off the west coast of Africa, and Andrew Claude Crommelin and Charles Rundle Davidson in Sobral, in Quirá, Brazil, during the solar eclipse on May 29, 1919, which Einstein had postulated?
The light that bent did so not because of the solar mass, but because of the zero magnetic field located near the Sun. Even within a solenoid, you can observe that a beam of electrons is deflected in a magnetic field. There's nothing remarkable about that. If light were bent near a mass, this phenomenon would be well observed near the planets. Say on Mars, which is very close to Earth. The Moon, for example, would be an excellent place for observation during eclipses. However, this curvature was only observed exactly where the magnetic center of our system is located. Therefore, the light was deflected by the magnetic center, bending over the Sun. If you had the proper equipment, you'd see that the light also bent on the opposite side to the center, as if trying to distance itself from the Sun. To infer from this the curvature of space is unscientific. Space, unless transformed, is relative to nothing and has no form. It's not curved or straight, and it has no dimension. It's simply space, infinite in all directions. At any point where an observer is placed, they will always have the infinite universe before them.
Then, after that, I questioned him. Then, is it impossible to conceive a limit to matter?
If there were a point in space that served as a limit to creation, there God would be enclosed. But God is infinite, and the universe is but a point to him. Only materialist science could limit creation. If we were to assume a limit, what then would lie beyond it?
I answered his question. I suppose nothing.
Yes, there would be nothing. But space is the nothingness transformed by God. Matter too is nothing. If it contains anything, it is the divine energy that fertilized space. To you, matter is something. But pass it through a beam of cathode rays, and it will vanish from your sight. You will see only space. Everything that appears is an illusion to our senses. Nothing has real existence. Only the spirit is something, and it is precisely this that earthly science refuses to acknowledge.
So I said to him, "It is painful for us to see that our dearest beliefs are in complete contradiction with reality."
What is truly painful in man is the perseverance in error. If I had been wrong throughout an eternity, I would feel joy on the day someone clarified the truth for me. Believe me when I say, I speak the truth. What pain can one feel in losing the wrong to gain the right?
After this reflection, I say, but it is difficult for us to abstract relativity from science.
It would be difficult for science, too, to abstract from the experiments of Heinrich Hertz and Augustin Jean Fresnel, which concluded the wave theory of light. However, when it suits her to explain the electronic theory, she resorts to the wave system, when discussing atomic theory. She reverses the argument and claims the electron is a particle, drawing on Max Planck. Before you abandon relativity, first resolve whether the wave theory or the emission theory is true. First, verify the true speed of light, determine the actions and reactions of the planetary system. But do not use two spirits in one science to explain the same thing.
After this reflection, I say, I've noted the factors you mentioned that influence gravity, but there's a case to be considered. If it's true that the density of bodies influences, at the top of a mountain the air is thinner. Thus, iron, for instance, being in a more subtle medium, should weigh more. Yet, the opposite occurs. The higher up, the lesser the weight.
But I also mentioned that gravity is influenced by the ethereal mass that surrounds the planet. If atmospheric pressure at sea level is equivalent to a mercury column of 76 centimeters, for every 10 meters of elevation, the column drops about 1 millimeter. Therefore, we must consider the pressure bodies undergo, depending on their density. With lower atmospheric pressure at altitude, the weight will be less. If gravity were a force with its own attributes, and if it were what held bodies in space, it would be quite difficult for earthly science to explain why meteors are kept in their orbit. Every year, the Earth collides with millions of meteorites, always in the same month. This means they are located at a single point. Now, if the law of gravitation existed, they would either all be drawn towards the Earth or would have already been attracted by the Sun. Yet those that manage to penetrate the ethereal mass fall to Earth, and the others continue always at the same point. They are thus balanced between the magnetic attraction of the system's center and solar repulsion. For terrestrial gravity to exist, solar attraction would be necessary, but neither of the two exists. If my reasoning were not true, bodies in a vacuum would not all fall at the same speed. For the sake of argument, let's suppose gravity exists. But if in a vacuum all bodies fall at the same speed, it ceases to be true that matter attracts matter in direct proportion to the masses, especially if that matter is in a vacuum. Once this premise is overturned, it's easy to see that if there is a vacuum between celestial bodies, solar gravitation, if it existed, would have to attract all bodies equally, regardless of their mass. But all of terrestrial astronomy is based on the mass of bodies and the distance at which they are found. Therefore, the conception you have of the cosmos is false. Furthermore, when Newton supposed the existence of a gravitational force, he had to imagine the existence of an ether. For him, this force would not be possible without a medium. And it is very singular that, later on, relativity denies the ether, yet clings to gravitation. They admit what the very creator of gravitation could not admit. Thus, we do not negate any gravity. We merely take advantage of the forces of nature. If our device flew based on the negation of gravity, as you supposed, we would have only one direction of travel. We would always fly against the terrestrial movement, and it would be impossible to follow the same direction or head towards the poles. Moreover, our speed would be limited to 1,660 kilometers per hour, which is negligible. Indeed, it would be laughable for a device that came from another planet with such a low speed and having only one direction of travel. Such a disk would be far inferior to terrestrial airplanes, and it would be a case of coming to learn from you a bit about dirigibility and how to fly faster.
I asked the commander, "Will it ever be possible for us to traverse space and visit other planets?"
Yes, it will be possible. But when speaking of traveling through space to reach other worlds, as is currently discussed on Earth with an eye towards the subjugation of other civilizations by force of arms, it's necessary, before undertaking such a tremendous risk, to understand all the laws that govern the planetary system and the peculiarities of each planet. That otherwise, you would be destroyed before leaving the rarefied matter surrounding Earth, and we, the future conquered, would not be pleased to see you entombed in the gaseous element of the planet. Space has no visible door, but is locked to those who ignore the fundamental laws that govern it. Knowledge is the key that opens it. However, given the current state of earthly knowledge, this is but a vain chimera. It is not possible, in one leap, for a science still ignorant of what lies beyond 500 kilometers in height, to embark on the conquest of space. How do you expect a man, ignorant of the forces that act upon and maintain the planets, to leave Earth? It would be more astonishing than if a native were to build a machine and fly as the civilized do. A journey based on fuel is impractical for several reasons, not least because fuel is unnecessary. A flight based on fuel would require an enormous reservoir, considering the time it would take for such a device to reach another planet. Then there's the return journey. Well, that's impractical. But the difficulties of the terrestrial are illusory. It is enough to understand the cosmic laws, and everything becomes easy. If we have achieved it, so can you. Earth scientists have got their oxen reversed. Seeing that Earth lacked a point of support to move in its orbit, they made their calculations based on solar attraction when it is exactly the opposite. In reality, its force is repulsive. Then, it being evident that a body cannot be maintained in orbit by the action of a single force, they endowed centrifugal force with miraculous virtues, attributing to it the character of a concurrent force in the orbital movement of planets. Nothing could be more inaccurate. Even if centrifugal force balanced a planet, which is false, there would be a huge gap challenging the acumen of the wise, the force that propels the planet in one direction. It is understood also that centrifugal force causes the opposite effect, but the absence of a third force that would stop the planet is not understood. When a stone is spun around held by a string, the string represents the attraction, centrifugal force plays the role of repulsion. But the individual represents the third force that gives the body its direction. If the acceleration is equal to force divided by mass, since force is equal to acceleration multiplied by mass, what would be lacking for Earth to move is the propulsive force, F, which gives the mass m acceleration. It is logical that a body animated by acceleration goes into motion, but it is absurd that this acceleration is created without a force and thus maintained, when there is a consumption of energy resulting from the movement of the body against gravitational action. You say centrifugal force, meaning all points of a mass seek to flee the center. We say differently. For us, all points M tend to describe a straight line in space in the direction of a tangent to the equatorial plane and in the direction of the force that propels them. This interpretation of centrifugal force is what gives us the direction of the disk when we leave Earth or any other planet. Without it, there would be no interplanetary flight. Let's now analyze the consequences of the terrestrial system based on solar attraction and repulsion resulting from centrifugal force. If all points of a mass seek to flee the center, the action of solar attraction against centrifugal force would cause energy consumption due to the resulting friction, and the planet would stop in space. We must also consider that this consumption would be double, as Earth develops two kinds of centrifugal force. The first, due to translational motion, and the second, due to rotation around its axis. No body can perform work without having a source of energy, If this were the case with Earth, then all of physics, including thermodynamics, would be wrong. This alone would be enough to demonstrate the inaccuracy of terrestrial astronomy, since a theory is only good when it resolves all the relevant problems posed to it. Consider further. The Earth has a translational speed of 106,000 kilometers per hour, a distance from the Sun of 149.5 million kilometers. And the planet Jupiter has a translational speed of 47,000 kilometers per hour and a distance from the Sun of 780 million kilometers, supposedly 317 times greater than the mass of Earth. Jupiter, being 317 times more massive than Earth, would experience a tremendously greater attraction than Earth. Thus, to maintain its orbit, it would require a high translational speed. However, despite its large mass, its revolution speed is insignificant. Either Earth has too much speed for its mass and would escape its orbit, or Jupiter has too little and would approach the Sun. Note that I say Jupiter's mass is 317 times that of Earth, not to contradict your calculations, which were based on solar attraction and centrifugal force. But even that is not true. You might object that Jupiter, with its large mass, is situated far away due to the principle of physics that says larger mass spheres receive more intense action from centrifugal force. But to this, I would counter by pointing out Mars, which is smaller than Earth and is further away. I would show you the planets beyond Jupiter, which are smaller than it, and yet are at immense distances from the Sun. And they also have low revolution speeds. It's a contradiction. Nature's phenomena are simple and easy and can be explained with simplicity. The difficulties lie in the analytical capacity of beings who often devise complicated systems that are true monstrosities. Consider the long-held belief that Earth was supported in space by elephants. If someone had thought to ask where the elephant's feet rested, that system would have collapsed more quickly. No one can solve a problem without considering all the factors that contribute to the solution of a calculation. In the movement of the planets, they forgot there was a loss of energy resulting from solar attractive force against the double centrifugal force. If the origin of the force is not explained, which in our case is the support point of the elephant's feet, then the problem was solved on false premises. In the system I claim to be true, the force is derived from the potential difference that sunlight establishes, illuminating one face of the planet while the other remains in darkness. In being a body balanced between two competing forces, attraction and repulsion, it has no weight at all and moves like a stone spun around held by a ray represented by a string. Any mechanical phenomenon in the universe can be explained.
I asked the commander, "There's a significant difficulty that you seem to overlook. If there's any logic that planets can be sustained between the attraction of a defined zero point in our system and the repulsion caused by solar energy, I suppose your theory would not hold up when observing satellites. For example, how can we fit these elements into the problem of sustaining the moon in space?"
With the theory of centrifugal force, there's no explanation. Before pointing out the solution, let me indicate the difficulties of the system created by Earthlings. The moon does not make a perfect circular motion around Earth. Sometimes it approaches, other times it moves away. The difference in distance between the planet and the satellite reaches up to 42,000 kilometers. If the moon were sustained by gravitation against centrifugal force, it should describe a perfect orbit, and having a balance of forces, it could never move away or approach. unless there was a scheduled disturbance of the laws of gravitation, which is not admissible. This without considering that in one of those movements of approach, breaking the balance, the satellite would collide with Earth. Mars's first satellite presents a curious phenomenon that is a complete denial of what you believe to be true. While Mars rotates in 24 hours and 37 minutes, its satellite makes 3 revolutions around the planet, taking only 7 hours and 39 minutes each time it does so. We return to the same question then, asking where the force comes from that makes the satellite disobey the planet's gravitational laws and make 3 revolutions instead of 1. I now point out to you the reason why the moon remains in space, without colliding with its planet. This satellite is on the periphery of the ethereal mass that surrounds Earth. Between the 2 bodies, there's a magnetic attraction, with Earth's poles acting on the moon's and vice versa. At the same moment that the magnetic fields are attracted, the masses are repelled by solar light.
I asked the commander, surprised. How?
Solar light reflects from the moon to Earth and from Earth to the moon. The combined action of reflection from both bodies provides the necessary repulsion to overcome the magnetic effect. The result is the satellite maintaining its orbit. When the reflection of solar light occurs between the 2 bodies, the pressure is greater and the moon moves away. However, as the moon reduces the reflection of light, the pressure decreases proportionally, increasing the magnetic attraction, and the satellite approaches. This variation makes the moon's orbit a perfect ellipse. It's a mistake to assume that lunar attraction causes tides. What happens is exactly the opposite, as can be verified. Reflected solar light, coming from the moon, exerts pressure on the ocean's liquid mass. Compressed at one point, the liquid mass rises at another. Hence the delay of tides caused by the moon.
Notes from the author of the book. The liquid mass, when compressed at one point, rises at 2 other points, which is the reason for the 2 tides. The lunar tide is a consequence of the light reflected from the moon, while the solar tide is due to the light pressing directly. This is why the tides are higher during a full moon. When these pressures are combined over one point, the highest tides occur. The pressure of light is not only equivalent to the small weight it shows on the Earth's surface. By pressing intensely on one layer, its intensity gradually decreases until its weight is insignificant at the Earth's surface. It behaves like a projectile that, when hitting an obstacle, has great penetrating force initially but gradually loses this force until it completely stops. This pressure of light is transmitted through the atmospheric layers, reaching the liquid mass. This same compressive force of sunlight causes the winds. By pressing on the upper layers, this force is transmitted to the atmosphere situated on the Earth's surface. The pressure difference found in the atmosphere produces currents, whose intensity depends on the exerted pressure. Hence, most winds originate at the equator, where this force is most intense.
The same difficulty astronomers had in explaining the variation of the moon's orbit they had for the orbits of the planets, because it really does not conceive an elliptical orbit if the sun attracts the bodies. But displacing the sun around the zero magnetic center, sometimes the repulsion is stronger and the planet moves away. Other times the magnetic center is closer to the planet and it approaches. The difference in the eccentricity of orbits observed among the planets is due to the volume and density of each one. Thus, it is more rational to calculate the density of celestial bodies by observing the diameter they present and the distance they maintain at aphelion and perihelion.
I asked the commander, but the pressure of the reflected light between the 2 bodies must be too small.
It is no less than the magnetic attraction. Verify for yourself that the attraction is also insignificant, given that the moon makes its movement around Earth in almost 30 days. If it were strong, The satellite would revolve around Earth with equal speed, and its daily advance of approximately 50 minutes would not be noticed.
I continued to question him. Does this mean the satellite does not have its own movement?
Exactly. It simply undergoes the effect at a distance from the terrestrial movement. Earth's velocity produces angular velocity in the Moon of almost 1/28th. It's as if only Earth's axis exerted an attraction. Therefore, there can be no attraction of the masses, but magnetic attraction.
I asked the commander, knowing all these things, how do you proceed with the crossing of space, or rather, how should we proceed if we attempted the crossing?
I've explained to you how the ionization of the atmosphere by cathode rays occurs. The ionized bubble is absorbed, creating a vacuum in its trail into which the disk launches itself, ascending as well. Now, the Earth develops a speed on the solid surface equal to 1,660 kilometers per hour, yet no one feels it moving. This means that, if we ascend in relation to a point on the Earth's surface, we are increasing our speed without feeling the slightest hint of acceleration. Ascending to a height of 400,000 kilometers, we would have reached, without any effort other than having ascended, a speed of 106,000 kilometers per hour, which is equal to the planet's revolution speed in space. We will not see or feel the degree of acceleration achieved due to the lack of a reference point. But if there were an observer stationary outside the ether belt where we believed ourselves to be at rest, they would see us moving at a terrifying angular velocity. Developing this speed, we try to escape from the etheric layer, falling into the vacuum. Due to the tendency of moving bodies to describe a straight line, we let ourselves escape from the etheric layer at a point where the disk, following a straight line, will reach the planet we aim for. To explain one principle, I must sacrifice another. I told you straight line to simplify the reasoning, but the truth is we have to consider the curvature we undergo due to the forces of attraction and repulsion. However, we describe a straight line because we have means to correct the differences. If we form a magnetic field with the large solenoids we possess, we are attracted. If we turn off the field, we are repelled. Hence, the need to know well the laws of nature, because, otherwise, we would never reach any planet. To simplify for you, I also stated that we leave Earth with a speed of 106,000 kilometers per hour. However, the reality is that the minimum escape velocity we use is 200,000 kilometers per hour developed by the device, which added to the 106,000 kilometers per hour caused by Earth gives us a minimum of 300,000 kilometers per hour. However, we employ much higher speeds unbelievable to you. Nature has resources that Earthlings cannot even suspect. With the 106,000 kilometers per hour that Earth freely provides us, as if inviting beings to attempt the crossing, it's possible to reach other planets. But there are some dangers due to the energy consumption caused by solar repulsion. It's noteworthy that we make a movement at a 90-degree angle against the direction of solar repulsion. If we were going in the same direction, we would be propelled, but since we oppose it, we are repelled, resulting in a consumption of kinetic energy. Therefore, a higher velocity is required, as the laws of inertia only apply up to a certain point. A pilot accustomed to these crossings could make the journey with this low velocity, but it would take a very long time. With high escape velocity, we do not need any fuel or other energy source, except for small amounts for our internal use. When a body ascends to a certain height from the Earth's atmosphere, it enters into violent rotation. This fact has been observed numerous times by you. This phenomenon is due to the same reasons why the Earth spins. With a slight pressure, a body illuminated on one side and dark on the other tends to rotate about itself around an imaginary axis. This is a great danger for the less informed. The same thing happens in space. To correct this, we heat the part of the device opposite the sun, which gives us balance. The main technique is in making contact with the etheric layer of the planet we want to reach. We have to do it in the same direction as the planet's rotation. If we do it in the opposite direction, the device will be inexorably destroyed. Therefore, we approach by skimming the etheric mass in the direction of its movement. Two bodies running in the same direction have their velocity nullified between them, and it's as if they were stationary. The contact of both does not cause friction. However, it's worth mentioning that we have resources in space to make the disk stop or proceed, and naturally, to increase or decrease the velocity. If we develop an acceleration of 300,000 kilometers per hour, it would be dangerous to hit an etheric layer with low rotational speed, even though in the same direction of its movement. In this case, we reduce our speed until it matches that of the etheric layer. It's worth opening a parenthesis to explain to you the phenomenon of meteors hitting planets. If they reach the etheric layer in the opposite direction of its movement, they are shattered. But if they come in the same direction, they sometimes manage to reach the planet's surface. It depends, however, on the speed with which they arrive at the planet. If we go from Earth to Jupiter, we usually pass by Mars or Venus, depending on the position of the planets at the moment. In your case, who do not have great technical resources for speed correction in space, if you ventured on a journey to Jupiter, the procedure should be as follows. The Earth moves at 106,000 kilometers per hour, Mars at 86,000 kilometers per hour, and Jupiter at 47,000 kilometers per hour. Leaving Earth at 106,000 kilometers per hour would be dangerous to hit Jupiter at only 47,000 kilometers per hour. The solution would be to land on Mars, starting to develop a speed identical to that planet, namely 86,000 kilometers per hour. A difference of up to 40,000 kilometers per hour against the ether does not produce considerable friction. To avoid unforeseen events, you should turn on the Geissler tubes at the moment of contact, avoiding friction as much as possible. With the speed provided by Mars, you would make the journey to Jupiter, although it would take a long time for the crossing. In Jupiter, you should never hit the planet, but rather the satellites. The narrow etheric layer offers serious risks in making contact, unless the device has its own resources for braking in space. Preferably, you should first reach Ganymede, which has a large atmospheric and etheric layer and possesses high speed. Io would also be advisable. It would be a mistake for you to pass by Venus, because in that planet you would obtain a speed of 126,000 kilometers per hour, and the difference would be too great for Jupiter. If one day you leave Earth with these precautions, you will see your planet recede as if fleeing, and you will see the targeted planet coming towards you, without the slightest shock. But do not travel without weighing all the consequences.
I asked him about navigation. What would happen if we stopped the device? Say, if we approached the planet without horizontal acceleration, just with vertical.
Only once in life can a man make such a mistake. There would not be a second time. They would be irrevocably destroyed. The impact would have unparalleled intensity. It's the same as someone standing on railroad tracks, and against their body, a locomotive developing high-speed crashes. Know that many have made this mistake and perished. It was hard for us to learn the secrets of space. You would not have our difficulties if one day you were to travel through space, because we would tell you the dangers that can hinder the steps of the daring traveler. Just listen to us, and terrestrial pedagogy says that more intelligent is the individual who benefits from the experience of others than the one who reaches the same conclusion at the cost of their own experience. Notice that you threaten to dominate us and even destroy us, but even so, we do not want your ruin. Quite the contrary, we would regret a failure of the Earthlings, as we regret many things that you do. We want to see you as knights of space maneuvering the reins of a fiery steed, or as fearless sailors plowing the tumultuous waters of the cosmos. Perhaps then you would understand the greatness of God's work, who distributed wealth with a generous hand in all quadrants of infinity, and see that there is no need to fight for land and living space. Fighting for living space reveals ignorance of the universe's greatness. It's behaving like a turkey that, enclosed in a symbolic circle, lacks the reasoning to see that it just needs to take one step to gain the expanse. And do not live to destroy God's children in wars of carnage for miserable oil wells, which are nothing more than tiny holes made on the Earth's surface. If you want energy, space sends it in all directions through cosmic rays. It's like dying of thirst while navigating on the Amazon River. Just lower the container and fill it at will. If you want to stop wars and live as rational creatures, we will teach you how to collect energy, whether atomic, solar, magnetic, cosmic. Learn to be peaceful and merciful, and the other older brothers of the system will teach you how to make this a garden more dazzling than that of fairy tales. Do not believe that God made the world evil, because his desire is for everyone to be happy. He cannot be satisfied with anyone's suffering. Pain, physical or moral suffering, difficulties cannot elevate anyone, but only demonstrate the debased state of senses in which man finds himself. If suffering does anything, it's to produce revolts and blasphemies against he who only does us unceasing good. Each one is responsible for the misery and disgrace in which they find themselves. Let the man change his heart, make earnest pledges to be kind and merciful, and he will immediately have by his side a multitude of brotherly men who will lend aid, not to mention the assistance and joy from on high. Be assured that the Father is better equipped to give than the Son to ask. At present, the great earthly powers prepare for war. In a few years, they will have their swords sharpened for the holocaust to their god Moloch, and a multitude of victims will suffer from the commercial interests of some potentates who do not measure consequences to achieve their goals, even at the expense of the lives of many. I lament human blindness. They preach peace and destroy the earth. They talk of love and carry out the commandments of hate. They believe in progress and degrade their senses to fall lower than beasts. For a long time, we have witnessed terrestrial carnage, hoping that man would one day comprehend the work of God and repent. We waited for the transformation, but all in vain. Vain I know it still is to show them our presence in and offer our help. We fulfill, however, an order, and let our hearts be satisfied in extending a hand to others. You must be wondering why I tell you our knowledge without restriction, and you find no explanation. It is because what we have, we like to share with those who have not. We also do as a remedy given to a child. If it is bitter, we put it in a sweet. With this scientific explanation, we make them a desperate appeal to unite in the great Christian ideal of fraternity and to abhor wars and prescribe them forever. It is a notice that we are ready to help them with all our resources, asking nothing in return except the right to call them friends, if you allow us. We are not interested in your raw materials, for we can obtain them by transformation at will. We want to come to Earth and land in your cities, live among the people, enjoy their company. If we could not come down because of haste, we would greet you with a friendly tilt of our wings. And you would come to us, live, and also dwell in our world, using everything we have. Because in our society, goods are priceless. The currency among us is fraternity. We do not trade with the goods that God gives us, but position ourselves as stewards. The hand is extended for a handshake. We do not want to withdraw it empty. We intend to take with us the warmth of friendship. However, we will not accept for ourselves a fraternity that men do not use among themselves. We want the crumbs, what is left over from the human heart, when it vibrates with love for those who inhabit the same world with him. On the day there is a festive banquet of love in the world, we will accept what is left over and falls from the table. If the cause of wars is misery, tell us and we will help you. It saddens me, however, to see that this is not the reason, because poor peoples hardly ever fight. The slaughter has become the prerogative of the strong, the wealthy, those who do not need help and even deny God, and see no need for the divine presence in their lives. Abundance has blinded them, the stomach has overpowered their sight. Thus the fight is the product of selfishness. They also do not fight for principles, because a man of principles never fights. The great principles that have guided the lives of many men on earth, and also guide the lives of other worlds, are the love of God and neighbor. If the greatest command to love even one's enemies, no other can exist that justifies taking the lives of the weaker, that commands the elimination of a people to have peace. There should only be one peace, the peace of conscience, of all.
I asked to the commander, based on your theory that sunlight repels bodies and that light, reflected from the moon, exerts pressure on the Earth, including causing the tides, why does the moon, when it crosses the Earth's orbit at the front, cause an advance in the Earth's revolution and a delay when it crosses the back part?
It's clear that, with the moon in front of the Earth, the pressure of light acts with a thrust on the lunar surface. When the moon is within the Earth's field, this thrust on the lunar surface is transmitted through magnetism to the Earth, as though it were a push on the Earth's rear. This operates like a system of force transmission. The opposite occurs when the moon positions itself at the rear of its planet. Pressing upon it is as if it were opposing the Earth.
I continued to ask the commander, you told me that if a comet came in the opposite direction to the Earth's rotation, it would be shattered. Yet it seems that comets avoid approaching other bodies, as in the case of those that, when nearing Jupiter's satellites, are deflected. Why?
This is still due to the repulsion that light causes in bodies. The satellites reflect light not only onto the planet, but onto all the satellites. Thus, they act as mirrors upon the comets. With all the satellites combined, the intruder receives an opposing thrust and is forced to change direction. If the action of repulsion caused by the light reflected from the satellites is performed forming an angle with the direction of the intruder, it will invariably be deflected. But if that repulsion is against the direction, then the comet has good chances of reaching the planet because its acceleration, though decreasing as it penetrates, will ensure the encounter. This happened with the planet Saturn. A comet penetrated the system, shattered a satellite in its path, and both satellite and comet turned into a great ring. In this ring, the cometary mass and the satellite mass can still be seen, forming concentric circles according to the density of each's matter.
I asked the commander, "You also talk about the ether belt that exists around the Earth." However, Albert Abraham Michelson, in his famous experiment, did not find the ether.
He didn't find it, nor could he have. The delay he sought to find in the speed of light, due to friction with ether, could not occur if the ether moves with the same angular velocity as the Earth. When two bodies develop identical velocity in the same direction, to each other it is as if they were stationary. It doesn't matter the velocity that an observer placed outside the system may measure, but rather the relative velocity between 2 points in the same system. A mass m can rotate at any velocity. What matters is to see if 2 points of the mass have the velocity difference. The great problems are explained with the simplest figures. Let's see the following. In a bus at high speed, a small fly moves from the rear to the front, spending in this motion 15 seconds. When it makes the move in the opposite direction, will it spend more than the 15 seconds it took in the first itinerary?
I answered the question. No, it will spend the same time, since it is inside the vehicle.
Exactly, it will spend the same time. Now, say that a person is sitting at the rear and another at the front. The person at the back throws a ball to the one at the front, and vice versa. The ball, considering it had the same impulse in both directions, must have taken the same time to go and return. It is seen that the speed of the bus was external, that is, in relation to points outside the bus. Internally, there was no velocity. The same reasoning Albert Abraham Michelson should have applied in his experiment. The light was the ball going from one part to another without any delay. It couldn't suffer delay in relation to ether as well as in relation to the atmosphere. It was like saying there was no atmosphere, because he didn't find the delay resulting from it. However, Michelson was not to blame at all. The blame lies with those who thought that the ether was universal and was stationary in relation to the Earth. Based on a false hypothesis, anyone would have come to the same misleading result. If in a syllogism one takes as a basis a false minor premise, also false must be the conclusion, or the major premise. False theories produce false results. Well, based on a flawed experiment from the viewpoint it was intended, the terrestrial being erected an entire theory. It's the case to apply the syllogism rule again and say that the terrestrial theory is false, for being based on a false experiment. Michelson found a constant for light as. Would this constant be true? The answer is negative. If he didn't find a delay for the light, it's because Number 1. There can be no delay in the movement of a body if all points of its mass move with identical velocity. This means that the ether had the same impulse as the light, minus the velocity of the latter. Number 2. The medium was homogeneous. Number 3. The distance used for measurement was very small, 12 yards. Number 4. The delay of light by friction should be sought by comparing two different mediums, like air and water. Number 5. Light is only visible on the planet if it has a velocity of 300,000 kilometers per second. Let's clarify. The friction he sought and didn't find could be found in the mirror reflecting the light because, for it to reflect, it needs a friction with the barrier. In water, for instance, the reflection is not total because in it a part of the light is absorbed. This proves there was pressure, friction, and absorption. When we observe the moon, we notice that the light it reflects is already degraded. In his experiment, it happens that the quantity of visible light that made friction, its frequency fell, and it was no longer visible. But the energy emitted in ultraviolet waves frictioning with the barrier fell the frequency to the visible spectrum. Thus, the light that returned was not the one that was previously visible, but the one that had remained invisible until the moment of friction. It depends on what we call light. What is darkness for you may be flooded with light for me. A simple pressure of the lens or of the optic nerve can demonstrate this truth. There are animal species that see at a different frequency, and for them night is day and vice versa. Infrared rays are a form of invisible light, and their speed is much less than that of visible light. On the other hand, chemical or actinic rays are visible light, since they have a much higher frequency. Unless it wasn't true that speed equals frequency over wavelength. If we say that visible light travels in space at a speed of 300,000 kilometers per second, we tell the truth. But we would be mistaken if we thought that any wave frequency has the same speed. We must consider certain aspects of the problem. These rays, to propagate, need a medium appropriate for their wavelength and frequency. Heat rays or infrared require a dense medium, as they are not transmissible in a vacuum. Visible light can propagate in a dense medium up to a certain limit, less than the infrared, and in a semi-vacuum. In absolute vacuum, there is no propagation of light. We call rhombuses of space, as the case of the coal sack of the Milky Way. This can be better observed. In a Geissler tube, also, it is seen that light stops producing shadow when the internal pressure of the tube is very low. However, the vacuum is the ideal medium for the propagation of waves above visible light. Thus considered the problem, the light that reaches the Earth's surface is degraded. Were it not so, and the chemical rays would make life on Earth disappear. See how wise God is that to protect the planets that are close to the sun, He gave them a protective layer of thick atmosphere and ether, while those that are distant, with low revolution speed, this layer is small. The degradation of sunlight can be perceived even when the sun rises or sets. At sunrise or sunset, the light is red, while at midday it is white. This degradation from white to red occurs over a distance of 4,211 miles, corresponding to the Earth's equatorial radius, which the light has to overcome more to reach the observer than the light at midday, while the latter just needs to overcome 400,822 kilometers of ether. The light of the rising sun needs to complete 407,200 kilometers. From white to red, there's a difference of 300 billion vibrations per second. If in 6,758 kilometers it loses 300 billion, how much would it lose in 407,200? If the wavelength is the same and the frequency many times greater, much greater, then must be the speed with which the solar waves hit the ethereal surface that protects the Earth. Since the formula is wavelength equals the width of the line multiplied by d and divided by L. We arrive at the same result when we observe the difference in speed between the atmosphere and water. If in the atmosphere it is 300,000 kilometers per second, in water it only presents 225,000 kilometers per second. Thus, density powerfully influences. The light, which upon hitting the Earth's surface becomes visible, arrives at the ethereal layer with 10 million kilometers per second, and with much more speed come those that on Earth are still invisible. It's that the sun, when emitting its energy, does so in various wavelengths and in different frequencies. Its emission is not a uniform beam. We've reached a point where we can say that solar light exerts on the Earth a pressure equal to the weight of light, measured at the Earth's surface, plus the energy lost in traversing the 400,000 kilometers of ethereal mass. If we consider that the effect is double, being this fatigue of light progressive or in geometric progression, we will have an approximate idea of what this is.
I asked the commander, why a double effect?
Because as light loses weight, its frequency also falls, which in turn would influence, thus obtained, the pressure of solar light, and reasoning that if the Earth is held in orbit due to a balance of forces, of attraction and repulsion, the magnetic field responsible for the attraction must exert its force, with power equal to the repulsion. Thus, the intensity of the magnetic field and the number of its force lines can be determined.
Olaf Romer, notwithstanding the explanation you just provided, observed a delay in the time light took to cross the Earth's orbital diameter and found the same speed of 300,000 kilometers per second that other experimenters found. How can this be explained?
I have never perused Romer's mathematical data. However, as the result of his experiment starkly contradicts reality, we can juxtapose the optical phenomena occurring in space that delude the observer, for he undoubtedly encountered one such illusion. First and foremost, we must understand the sun's own motions. Thus, all the planets form a plane of movement, which we might call the equatorial plane of the system. The sun, however, describes a motion of revolution around the magnetic center at an angle to the plane of the planets. To be precise, 46 degrees. The sun has an orbit with a diameter of 10 million kilometers, which it revolves in 355 days. The same, therefore, as the terrestrial lunar year. This is why ancient terrestrial astronomers made their calculations based on a year of 355 days, which was the true solar year, and not the motion that the Earth executes around the center in 365 days. Now, if Romer made his observation of a Jupiter eclipse based on a phenomenon with a 200-day difference, the sun would have already moved and traversed more than half of its orbit, being distant from the original point by 9,800,000 kilometers. This shift in position results in a change in the timing of an eclipse for a planet. If a point, that is, a satellite, was casting a shadow on Jupiter, the sun's displacement over 200 days would modify the shadow's position by many kilometers. If the satellite develops a velocity of many kilometers from Jupiter, this would result in a delay of about 1,000 seconds, more or less, depending on the satellite's distance from the planet. I mean to say that the satellite would need to travel an additional 1,000 seconds for the predicted eclipse to occur. This is one reason that could have led Romer to a false assessment. Secondly, we would need to note the angle at which Jupiter was seen from Earth. If we had the precise time of the eclipse, we could regress the planetary movement and have the elements for calculation with accuracy. But in any case, the eclipse could occur at the predetermined time relative to a point on Jupiter. But due to the angle of observation, we would have the impression of a relative delay. Let's give an example. We take two bodies and position them in such a way that, from where we stand, an imaginary line tangents the periphery of both. If we move position, the line also shifts. In this case, one of the bodies also needs to move for the imaginary line to tangent it. Here is a second reason that could have escaped any observer's notice, no matter how astute. Romer could have erred due to one of these phenomena, as could any other.
I asked the commander, why do the lights of the planets appear in different colors? Mars is reddish, the others are white, if they all come from the same sun.
It's due to chemical light.
Then I continued to ask, what is chemical light?
Solar light always travels in the direction of the focus that sends it into space, whereas the other is diffuse. Its origin is the passage of energy through layers of hydrogen and sodium. Observe that in a shadow there's an illuminated band, representing this diffuse light. If it weren't for this chemical light, many planets would not be visible. Given the distance at which Pluto is from the Sun, it would never be seen shining. The Sun, observed from Pluto, is a small star and the amount of solar energy it receives is negligible. Nonetheless, the tiny planet gleams in space, diffusing a light of 0.16, while Mercury, which is close to the Sun, only presents 0.0582. It's because Pluto has an atmosphere excessively sensitive to solar waves, reacting violently with a small fraction of energy received. The light, therefore, observed on the planets is degraded light coming from the Sun and another, of a physico-chemical nature. Everything depends on the intensity of the latter. The light coming from Pluto is no longer of solar origin, as after colliding with the planet, its frequency falls too much. If the light Pluto receives is already very little, diffusing this light in space is as if it did not exist. There are also optical phenomena of nature that would be too lengthy to delve into. But I could tell you that the function of light is merely to create in space the conditions for sight to penetrate and see distant phenomena. But we should not enter into metaphysical phenomena.
I asked the commander another question. Some say that the heat we observe on Earth does not come from the sun. What truth is there in this?
The heat comes from the sun, but in the form of high-frequency waves. Being degraded, they transform into heat waves, infrared. This change, however, occurs in the atmospheres of planets. It does not come from the sun in the form of heat, because that does not traverse the vacuum. The heat on the sun is even bearable. It is simply a field where electric nature forces operate. A generator is cold, but the current it produces can provoke high temperatures. It's absurd to say that the sun has a temperature reaching millions of degrees. The fact of being luminous does not mean that it is hot, because even on Earth there are sources of cold light. A simple neon gas lamp reveals that not all light is warm. Many insects have cold light, as do some plants, which present luminescence provoked by the action of bacteria. More than the heat caused by the frequency of the rays, we have another caused by the pressure of light. At sunrise, the oblique rays do not exert pressure, and it seems that the sun is a red-painted giant without any power. But when it is overhead, the intensity of its rays compressed against the ground is evident. That is why we feel that it cools as we ascend. At the equator, which is struck by rays at a 90-degree angle, the heat is intense. At the poles, these rays are largely repelled by the magnetic effect, and the pressure is very small. Therefore, the cold of the poles results from the obliquity of the rays and their deviation by the magnetic effect. Some auroras are the result of electrical reactions in the ionosphere, but others are caused by the deviation of rays upwards, resulting in a luminous accumulation in the high layers.
I asked him, you say that it cools as we ascend, but it's not always so. There's a height where the thermometer reaches 2,200 Fahrenheit.
The heat found there comes from the physico-chemical reaction I spoke of. There are various bands that cause it. There you have it, my dear. Many flaws in your science. I am not surprised by the errors it contains, because anything in life should not be judged by the errors it incurs, but by the virtues and truths it encompasses. We are all imperfect, for perfection is an attribute that only divinity can have in absolute degree. In us, it exists mingled with errors. more errors than perfection. What I am astonished by, and with what sorrow, is that the sages of Earth, despite all the errors they have yet to remedy, rely on this flawed science and deny the supreme science that is God. They are like a firefly that, vain of its light, shouts to all the other fireflies, "There is no sun, because light can only exist in my tail."
What do you think about us? Could you point out our weaknesses? In a card game, those standing outside often know the best move, better than the players themselves. It's evident that your judgment would be free of bias. What should we do in the name of progress to achieve happiness?
You wish to be happy and think that material progress is the magic word that makes water spring from a rock. It's not the possession of goods or knowledge that can make a man happy or unhappy. Animals possess neither and yet are happy as God made them. The savage, in his habitat, lives peacefully, notwithstanding his poverty and ignorance. He probably wouldn't exchange his discomfort and lack of knowledge for the distinguished frock coat of a scholar participating in scientific symposia. True human happiness must lie in understanding that God has reserved for us a glorious destiny, in submission to the Creator's laws, in the feeling of love towards our fellows. What use is it for a man to have everything and all knowledge, to master all forces of nature, if he cannot keep dominion over his own heart? Many men of science have risen in the world and arrogantly felt superior to other men, but they died, and their principles were later shown to be inaccurate. They are remembered as individuals who thought they knew everything, but were mistaken and did not even know themselves. Others became famous for the possession of material wealth, but death destroyed their empires, and in their last moments they felt as unhappy as anyone, realizing they had lived in illusion. With science and money, no one has died happy. However, those who revealed wisdom through love still endure in the human heart, having died happy and lived so. Mary of Nazareth, Florence Nightingale, John the Evangelist are still alive as true individuals, making the light of their love illuminate the lives of many. You can be sure that the earthly Saint Francis of Assisi is on such a high pedestal that the sage who made the atomic bomb could never touch the soles of his feet, and he was unlearned. There are men of great wealth on earth, however their riches do not prevent a son from becoming a murderer or thief. In that case, did wealth make him happy? This wealthy man sends his son to a university, and after a few years, he returns educated and with a degree. But does a degree make an individual a good man? How many lawyers are thieves? How many doctors are murderers? How many engineers are swindlers? How many religious figures are immoral? I believe a father would feel happier having nothing to eat, having a son as a model of virtue, than drowning in money and seeing his son imprisoned as a thief or murderer.
I asked the commander, I know that moral elevation is superior to everything, but I wanted to know, from our material point of view, excluding the moral part, what are the main flaws in our methods? What could hinder our future?
No one can exclude the moral question from progress, but since you wish to know the effects and not the cause, I'll point them out. The human evil is never knowing how to proceed without looking back at the path taken. The consequence is turning into a pillar of salt, like Lot's wife. By nature a conservative spirit, man prefers to live in the nostalgia of a time that can never return, rather than in the hope of a radiant future. He fears the next day instead of assisting the future to pave his way. He expends tremendous efforts on what cannot aid him, wastes precious time, worshiping uselessness. For instance, they spend money, teachers' time, students' time, facility expenses, phosphates, to teach dead languages which should have been buried long ago. To teach useless things, they waste paper, ink, print, materials, chalk, and 1,000 other things that could be better utilized. Why, instead of an extinct language, don't they teach the process of photosynthesis? It's more valuable to know what a potential gradient or a sum of functions means than to know all the declensions of a dead language. But, instead of unveiling the grand future, they prefer to live among the mummies of history, unearthing skulls, to inject them with fictitious life. There is an infinity of things that children have never heard of, and possibly never will. Instead of oratory, show them how to grow onions and celery. Teach them that corn, besides being a good food, uses its stalk and leaves to obtain furfural, viscose, xylose, acetic acid, soap, alcohol, cellulose, sugar, boards, fabrics, fuel, alpha cellulose, etc. And that we should never bury the stalk and leaves because they are not suitable for compost and perpetuate certain pests in the soil. Tell them what soil pH means, how to correct acidity, what the soil's needs are in nitrogen, cesium, cobalt, sulfur, manganese, phosphorus. Show them that plant hormones can produce cabbage leaves 3 meters tall, apples weighing several kilos, as tender as peaches. Teach them that luciferin, combined with plant hormones and enzymes, makes flowers produce greenish light like electric lamps, and that roses treated this way become glowing giants. Children might forget the names of great devastators of humanity, but they will never forget that it's possible to transform almost all sunlight into usable energy by passing it through carbon gas that combines with water to form formic aldehyde, and that the oxidized aldehyde restores sunlight in the form of electrical current. There is much more beauty in the turning point of chemistry than in the matter regarding the destruction of Carthage. Millions die of cancer while in schools. Children are taught the colors of national flags, brutalizing man's innate gregarious feeling, which intuitively knows no artificial barriers that economic power erects in the world. Instead of memorizing the word China, let them learn cesium. Instead of France, Brazil, the United States, the Soviet Union, know nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, iron. Give them statistics indicating that cancer more often attacks people, children, or old, who have not yet attained or have already exhausted their virile power, and thus sex is an organic defense weapon, and its hormones should not be wasted merely for the satisfaction of instincts. I am amazed at a humanity that has not yet discovered the anti-tuberculosis factor, goes to school to memorize figures of rhetoric and learn declamation. This should be a pastime for those without mortal problems devastating millions of people. It's like a man in the throes of agony taking up the study of the metrics of Alexandrian verses. But all this combined still does not constitute the greatest human sin. The dispersion of efforts reaches a staggering degree. I don't have all the statistical elements of the world, nor of your country, but we can make an approximate calculation. In this country, there are about 50 million creatures. Of this number, 30 million consist of children not yet productive. 10 million are represented by women, leaving only 10 million men. Included in this number are retired elderly and the unemployed, beggars, tuberculosis patients, lepers, insane, disabled, blind, thieves, prisoners, unemployed, misfits, etc. A large part is dedicated to speculative branches, such as wholesalers, retailers, counterclerks, real estate and securities brokers, lawyers, bankers, and bank employees, etc. Another part is occupied in activities such as police, army, navy, air force, judges and their assistants, diplomatic personnel, public servants, etc. Only about 2 million productive men remain, divided between agriculture and industry. It remains to be seen if those dedicated to agriculture are also productive in the true sense of the term, and if the industries are those that the country really needs. However, assuming these men were productive, we would have 2 million for 50 million, that is, one man working for 25, which is absurd considering that this individual, who produces for 25, is the least resourced without machines to assist him, bled dry, exploited by those who live off his sweat, and maintain a high standard of living. Of the 1 million dedicated to rural life, a large part still harm society because they produce tobacco, marijuana, or engage in fattening animals that destroy the land, or later poison humanity with their meat. Of those dedicated to industry, we can say as much. Industries are good, and chimneys are the lungs that expel the carbon from the social organism. But the human effort in this direction is almost nil. When factories are made, it's not always to solve fundamental problems. Part is dedicated to manufacturing cigarettes to poison the organism, chewing gum, hunting and personal violence weapons, ammunition, decorative materials, irritating sauces, alcoholic beverages, etc. When there's a myriad of other useful and necessary things that could be manufactured in large quantities, like abundant clothing, medicines, herb neutralizers, synthetic plant hormones, devices to capture energy, electronic stoves, concentrated foods to aid afflicted populations, science and philosophy books, plastic shoes, surgical and orthopedic instruments, fertilizers, mechanical planters and harvesters, insect neutralizers, prefabricated houses, indestructible furniture, better mattresses, soil probing devices, nitrogen precipitators, etc., etc. But let's disregard all this dispersion of effort and see how you employ the sweat of those 2 million who, for better or worse, do something. I suppose the expense of your country amounts annually to around 65 billion cruzeros. Of this amount, 45 billion are spent on armed forces, 15 billion are spent on civil servants, assemblies, public debt interest, amortizations, banquets, governmental expenses, foreign ministry, protocol trips, electoral machinery, etc. A small part is devoted to good purposes, such as education, health, and agriculture. Imagine if all this economic potential were redirected to building roads, schools, hospitals, churches, research centers, sanitation, new industries, housing, clothing, medicines, transportation. Calculate if this immense legion of idlers seen wandering the streets during the day became a new source of production. The entire expenditure by the Republic is still not everything. What about the state expenses? Rest assured that just the expense on horses maintained for parades could feed and clothe a multitude of hungry people wandering the streets under the dew and rain. And it seems ironic that in a society where members suffer from hunger and cold, horses live with balanced rations, covered with good wool blankets. Is the police necessary? Yes, necessary. It's the necessity of the police state that Jean-Jacques Rousseau spoke of. But if it is necessary, it's because men have made it indispensable. If a people spend their sweat on bad things, from their frivolity comes misery, theft, and murder. If there were abundance, no one would think of killing or stealing. At the bottom of all human instinct, exaltation is money, because through it come repressions, greed, profit voracity, lack of mercy. If there's theft, it's not because the thief loves crime, except for exceptions. but because he feels robbed by a society that snatched away his right to have his own home, to plant without paying rent to anyone, and to fully enjoy the freedom that nature never begrudged. Due to the current lifestyle, the consumption of fuels is alarming. Cars, capable of carrying several people, run with only one individual who, most of the time, is just having fun, while another who works has no means of transport. The voracious desire for profit and commerce create needs for gasoline, oils, tires, etc., change society, and you would see the cars that clog the streets at rush hour disappear. Not only would there be savings on fuels, but also on cars. A man could work less than a year in his entire life and live better than the wealthiest on Earth. But for human society, even progress is perilous. Evolve cybernetics, and men will starve due to unemployment. Yet, even the manual tasks they perform today could be executed by obedient, helpful, and tireless electronic brains. These robots could plow, sow, spray insecticides, fertilize, prune, harvest, and process. If they encountered a sick plant, they would know whether it should be treated or if it posed a danger to others and needed to be sacrificed. These machines would reach a level of perfection that would automatically direct terrestrial vehicles without the risk of collision or accidents, pilot airplanes safely, communicating possible defects to the ground base, and taking repair measures mid-flight. They would measure metabolism and act as doctors, providing restorative energies as well. With far less than what is spent on cigarettes every year, cancer could be eradicated. With a tenth of the money spent on drinks, leprosy could vanish from the face of the earth, and tuberculosis would no longer be named in statistics. Atmosphere control could regulate the climate, preventing collective disasters and saving crops. Electric cells could be placed in the street, absorbing all noise whose vibration was of an irritating nature. Education could be transformed. Naturally, with a fundamental change, it would send teachers home, and, in the current state of the world, that would be a terrible thing, for those creatures would face serious hardships. Today, an individual spends the best years of his life bent over books, from age 7 to 30, and in the end, sees desolately that he has learned nothing, and that much still lies ahead. Life itself is too short to learn. However, using somnambulism with a true scientific spirit, the educational landscape could be transformed. In a few hours, a child could learn an entire science that currently demands time and robs the green years, and they would learn with utmost precision. It would suffice to let them fall into a directed hypnotic sleep, under the action of a medication applied at intervals, and a psychology teacher would dictate all the material to be learned into their ear. This could be done on a large scale, to thousands of students at the same time, using earphones on the somnambulists. It would be more convenient, easy, cheap, time-saving, and would not sacrifice the child with long lessons, teachers' impertinences, and other inconveniences of the current system. The student could go to school early, sleep, and return with the diploma of a doctor in science tucked into his pocket. Would there be too little time to learn? Could not the teacher dictate to him, in that period, an entire scientific subject? The spirit knows not the relations of space and time, and for it, an entire eternity can be summed up in a second, and a second can turn into an entire and endless eternity. Create a system of rapid transmission. Human thought is radiated in a band of 5 millimeters. Send it electrical messages in this band, in successive waves, and all human science could be transmitted in a short time. The same method should be employed to dispel atavistic tendencies and the inclination towards crime. In hypnotic sleep, the mind becomes docile, ready to learn, and to judge the benefit of good lessons. They could go further and break down the barrier that exists between the conscious and unconscious human mind, and all the knowledge of the free spirit, would surface to the patient's conscious as a present baggage. However, this attempt requires a certain technique, which can only be fully learned over time, because there is the danger of losing the mind's relation to time. Penitentiaries could be emptied, first because by destroying the mind's tendency towards crime, malefactors would no longer exist. Second, because criminals would be re-educated through the somnambulistic process and reintegrated into society. Modified in its framework, society would overcome the moral losses that hamper its steps. I've told you what I think from the material perspective, but much more I could say from the spiritual, indicating paths that science has never dreamed of. You preferred the material. Each one gets what they wish for.
Could you tell me why you think we are in danger with the use of atomic energy?
I don't say that the use of atomic energy poses a danger to humanity. What I assert is that the warrior hatred, combined with atomic energy, will destroy the Earth. Every metal has two sides. It depends on what they choose. Electric energy is useful to man for spinning motors, factories producing abundant light, medicines, indeed, everything that modern life necessitates. Yet with it, they also create electric chairs to take the life of another. Dynamite is useful for peaceful conquests, serving to bring down quarries, mines, opening canals, but it also serves as instruments of carnage. Aviation is a step forward on the path of peace, for the fraternization of men. But it is with it that they sow the destruction of cities and bring mourning into homes, casting countless innocent children into orphanhood, who know nothing of the commercial interests of the Earth's magnates. There's that story of Midas who turned everything he touched into gold. Well, man is a reverse Midas. If he touches the pure gold that God offers him, he transforms it into the rotten mud that plagues the world. Atomic energy is a gift from God, provided it is used sparingly and for peaceful purposes. Its excessive use and employment in warfare could be the total and irrevocable extermination of life, as it is currently known on your planet. The last chapter of atomic energy has not yet been written, neither on Earth nor anywhere else in the universe. In fact, it cannot be written by anyone because it is endless. You are still crawling in this vast field. Soon you will move to hydrogen and nuclear fusion, then to gamma rays as a weapon of destruction. If you don't destroy the globe with hydrogen bombs, you will do so in some other, more powerful way. A day will come for the end, when, at least upon discovering the magnetic effect of worlds, everything would be devastated. Place a monkey in a laboratory and see the outcome. Earthlings have before them two paths, life and death. May they choose wisely.
I asked, Commander, you mean to say that atomic energy is good, but its use in war is what's bad? Isn't that the case?
I speak in both senses. Regarding the moral aspect, it might even be redundant to say. I also speak from the material aspect.
I asked, what is its material effect?
Soon you will have devastating hydrogen bombs. Now, I told you that in the higher layers of the atmosphere, physical chemical reactions occur with the penetration of the sun's waves. These layers not only filter radioactivity, but are also the support of the Earth. Man is often admirable in his gestures of generosity, when he becomes good and has a good dose of intelligence. Other times he proves to be foolish. If a small increase in solar activity disturbs life on Earth, altering humans, Hertzian waves, the climate, etc., what harm could an increase in radioactivity, injected directly into the Earth's very heart, by hydrogen bombs do? A solar disturbance is periodic, but its effect disappears quickly because it results from waves. However, the radioactivity produced by hydrogen bombs has a lasting effect, since the atomic dust remains suspended, taking time to fall. When it is suspended, it poses a danger to the higher layers. When it falls, it poisons everything. A planet is a delicate organism whose natural balance cannot be destroyed with impunity. The radiative outbreak begins by influencing the human brain, disturbing it significantly. Soon, madness will spread across the Earth. With hydrogen bombs at the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, designated for the day and the hour, will be unleashed. Unknown elements will appear in poisoned plants, or in the end with them, men and animals. The seas will be poisoned and the fish will die. The waters will be contaminated at the source because they will be radioactive as they fall from the clouds. Rains of particles will fall upon the Earth and the crops will perish. Also, the atmospheric layers will be altered. Their analysis depends on the planet's stability. Then, they will cease to give light and will influence the solar luminosity. Unable to filter the solar waves any longer, you will see the luminous body in black color and feel indescribable sensations. Dantean scenes will ensue. This is when Earthlings will see how erroneous was the theory, based on the constant of light energy at 300,000 kilometers per second. The Earth will receive energy in ultraviolet waves with speeds of millions of kilometers per second. However, despite the solar intensity, there will be no light, but a rust red near the ground. Men will feel intense cold, but their flesh will be burned as if by hot iron due to the actinic ray waves. If a man looks at the sun, his sockets will rot. The higher layers produce or prevent earthquakes. With intense alteration, the entire Earth will tremble, and the cities of nations will perish like a house of cards. Below, they will have the oscillating Earth, and above, intense heat and darkness. The waters of the seas, violently compressed by solar waves, will form monstrous waves. The poles, subject to greater light pressure and melting in part, will alter the volume of waters, while the people of coastal cities will faint from terror. It will be the roar of waters forming a deadly duet with the internal thunder of the Earth. As atomic explosions continue, the Earth's average heat already begins to change, and so it will proceed by 0.3 degrees annually. If then the hydrogen war comes, it will be pandemonium. With what already affects the higher layers, it is enough to melt the polar ice cap and flood the low-lying cities. In 20 years, there would be a difference of 6 degrees Celsius. Before that, all the ice at the poles would have melted. Strange diseases will appear. The liver is the organic laboratory, and being attacked by the ingestion of radioactive elements scattered around the world, it will lose its ability to produce defensive elements. Cancer will swiftly prevail. Weird plagues will attack the skin and eyes, and there will be no remedy. Nursing mothers will weep with grief, knowing their milk, which should be the life of their offspring, carries with it lethal poisons that will destroy the child's bones and cause leukemia. Many, unable to withstand so much suffering, and will seek death, cursing life and those who brought so much despair to the world. Then humanity will see how far it was led by progress without God. Madmen in the streets, cripples in every sense, hospitals overrun, cemeteries full, barns empty, millions destroyed by war, children wandering without a father, cities destroyed, fields contaminated, water poisoned, terrified crowds, plague, anguish, blasphemy, pain, desolation. As on earth, the anguish of peoples, in the skies and the cosmic laws shaken. Will they not understand that only the progress of the Spirit, linked to God, can have value and lead man on the path of peace? Will they not see that only love can lead man to achieve eternity? But that's not all. At the same time as the atomic potential is prepared in the arsenals to strike the Earth, in one blow, guided missiles will be further perfected. The day will come when armies will lose their reason for being, navies will no longer have value, and aviation, no matter how advanced, will be obsolete. Men will destroy each other by pressing buttons. Then, the great danger will arise. In a moment as fast as lightning, a cloud of fire could annihilate all terrestrial life. A missile, to travel from one continent to another, needs to reach zones where only pure hydrogen exists. Naturally, a hydrogen bomb will be fitted to the tip of such a missile. Nows in the higher layers in atomic reactions proceed by different laws than those that reign on Earth. Magnetic fields act more weakly, and the bomb's triggers are activated more easily. The critical mass and the critical distance of the masses are not the same. Then the great catastrophe could happen. A chemical reaction hydrogen bomb could explode in the great mass of pure hydrogen in the high layer, and the entire Earth would turn into a hellfire. Even if the bomb only functions with heavy hydrogen, the homogeneous medium will ensure the transformation of those layers into helium suddenly. Then it will be the end. Perhaps it's better than the slow end. If this happens, what was predicted by the chief of the Apostolic College, St. Peter, when writing the last chapter of his letter, will be fulfilled. When that day comes, no one will know, because the strike will be delivered by surprise, without a formal declaration of hostilities. Men will be judging themselves safe, living normally, while a madman presses the button, stabbing the earth and murdering its inhabitants. What man sowed during all these years of life without God may soon be reaped in handfuls, for the ears of science have already become ripe.
I ask Commander, is all this just a possibility or a certainty?
That answer I cannot give. You Earthlings will tell me if you will leave this in the realm of hypotheses or turn it into reality. Man has his free will. No one can dictate what he should do. The only thing I can say is that these are the consequences. Let them not act like the sorcerer's apprentice and with things they still do not know the outcome of. Men are detonating bombs and without knowing that their effect is not immediate. Everything happens like the turning point in chemistry. The experimenter keeps dropping drops without anything happening. However, at one moment, the fatal drop hits the solution, and everything transforms. From that instant, no one can control the reaction anymore. The persistent radioactivity of the higher layers produces the same effect. Now, no one has ascended from the Earth to a certain height that could measure and observe what is happening. If they had known terrestrial luminosity before seen from outside, and could observe now, they would see the difference. The radioactive dust that remains in the stratosphere is already cause for concern for the fate of men. Experimental explosions will continue, and war will one day claim its right to be represented with an increase in this radioactivity. Let Earth scientists detonate bombs for another 15 years and see the result of their folly. It will be too late. If someone could calculate the effect of 200 hydrogen bombs on the highest layer of the exosphere surrounding the planet, they might run screaming through the streets, begging not to commit this madness. Unfortunately, my friend, the Earth is in the hands of madmen, and these unbalanced individuals will accuse us of lying if we tell the truth. The evil must come, but woe to the one who commits it. His fate is sealed. Do not think that no one will demand accountability for the lives cut short in the name of interests, whatever they may be. We all await a day of reckoning, and when we will say what we did with the gifts bestowed upon us by the Creator. As for the good, let them not be troubled, for God will know how to save them from the approaching hour. The righteous will not suffer for the sinner. This only happens once, and it has long since passed. We ourselves, if it were determined, could evacuate the earth, removing those who deserved it. We have thousands of devices, each capable of carrying thousands. However, we cannot intervene without someone higher judging it appropriate and indicating who deserves to be taken from this hell. But know that the righteous are not forsaken, for there are vigilant, invisible eyes watching this tiny planet, and they know very well those who act without malice. Pick up your Bible and read how Lot was taken out of Sodom when it was about to be destroyed, and compare the figure. Also read how Enoch and Elijah were taken in a chariot of fire. Therefore, there is no difficulty at all, and if we received such an order, we would know how to fulfill it thoroughly. I tell you more, if that someone judged that the earth should be destroyed, we would trust in his wisdom and execute his orders without hesitation. We would never argue. We would do as Abraham, who was prepared to sacrifice his son to be obedient to God. We could own a second and erase everything that exists on this planet, leaving nothing on its surface that has life. Before they looked up to the sky, the planet would have been sacrificed. We have the means and know how to use them. Consider that, if the Earth, with only a century of scientific progress, can achieve such great destructive power, how long have we, considering that when Earthlings still did not know mathematics, we were already making interplanetary journeys with cosmic energy propulsion?
So, I asked the commander, surprised, but can this happen? Would someone be capable of ordering our destruction?
Perfectly possible. It's not fair. That man's madness jeopardizes the stability of the planetary system and destroys the lives of others who are distant. If a new sun entered our system, it would not be as dangerous as if the Earth's hydrogen layer exploded. It would sow chaos in several inhabited globes. The imbalance of forces would be fatal for many if it were sudden. Then, there would only be one anticipated solution: the sterilization of living matter on Earth. It would be sterilized in a matter of seconds. But I cannot affirm that this is what will happen. I am not the one who makes decisions of this magnitude, nor is it anyone who inhabits a planet. It's the opportune moment for Earth scientists to stop and reflect, for the human being to stop considering himself the king of creation, for the man of Earth to descend from the pedestal his arrogance has placed him on, and understand that, if it's his custom to oppress the weak, it might happen that a stronger one decides to silence him. There were those who advised conquering other planets and that we be subdued. It's human audacity taken too far. It's too much folly. We could repeat to these people the chapter from Isaiah, which says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, you who said in your heart, I will ascend above the stars of the Most High and rule over the quarters of the north on the mountain of holiness. But you were cast down to the abyss." Isaiah chapter 14. Or we could repeat what happened when men in Babel and they intended to reach the sky with a tower. The tower, today, threatens the heavens again, represented by Earth's science, and may we not come down to confuse the language of men. As long as man engaged in his little wars of conquest, we tolerated everything. We just kept ourselves isolated, avoiding closer contact with those who could not understand us. Now, man represents a serious risk to all, and it could get worse tomorrow. I don't know the end of all this. I don't even know if man will repent of his ways, much less if a higher intelligence will continue to tolerate for much longer, or will decide to act, because I am a being of meager attributes. And my reach is still too short to say what should be the destiny of earthly things. But it's time for man to stop and reflect. It doesn't hurt to think a little. Enough of madness. Enough of crimes. Spare yourselves, and spare us. Do not induce us to an act of supreme despair. Do not lead us to evil. Do not drive us to the violence we so condemn, and that would make us bitter forever. Live, and let us live. We know your affairs better than you yourselves. We know when the warlords gather and what their deliberations are. We watch their cabinet meetings, know their hypocrisy when they exchange pleasantries, read their intentions in their spirits. Rest assured that before they put us in danger, we would act. We have orders to defend ourselves. We did everything possible to demonstrate that there are powers greater than those of Earth, wanting to show men that possession of force does not justify violence, and that we do not take the planet because we do not want to. We flew high, low, alone in formation. We performed acrobatics over cities, air bases, fortifications. I personally received orders and acted against an armed plane that ventured to open fire on my craft. But nothing convinces the earthly being. Let him continue on the atomic path he is following. One day the end will come. Either we or man himself, someone will press a button, ending the history of a humanity that preferred to die rather than live happily under the laws God gave them.
We met at Roosevelt Station. At first, we continued our discussion on various scientific subjects. Then, we talked about morals and religion.
Now as I must leave, if you wish to see me again, wait for me on the Agatuba Road between the 14th and 17th of November, 1956. If there is any unforeseen circumstance on your part, in 1959. If you are still here, I will come to see you. Once again, I will keep my word. However, I want you to always remember one thing. Do not place too much importance on everything we talked about regarding science. Science is merely a means to provide us with conveniences and teach us how to use the forces of nature. Seek science for the happiness of all, but seek God above all, because only He has meaning in the universe. In love lies the true science. What does it profit a man to know all things, to have no secrets from him in the universe, if he loses his soul? Science is like a civil law. It is only good when it serves to guarantee the rights of man, to protect him, to support him, to serve him. If it loses its protective nature, and instead of serving becomes an opprobrium, it is better to disappear and be replaced. Wrong laws cannot and should not be respected. They are like the salt Christ referred to. If the salt loses its quality and its power to salt, it is better to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Likewise, Mossy, science exists so that by it man may live well, and there may be abundance over all creation. But if this science, instead of being a gift from God, becomes a source of destruction for the human race, it is better to be forgotten Without it, man can live enjoying what nature spontaneously gives, but without the spirit of mercy and respect for the life of another, the life on earth will be inexorably destroyed. God does not destroy anyone, but man through science will end up destroying himself and his neighbor. Nor seek the salvation of your soul through science. If it were a means to enrich the spirit based on wrong science, man would have been in hell a long time ago. Its possession means nothing. Without it, millions continue living as spirits, but with it, millions have found only misfortune. What is the value of knowledge that used an entire people as guinea pigs, killed thousands, destroyed innocents, brought tears to many hearts in those unforgettable cities of Japan, whose names stand as a marker on the road to destruction? It can have no value. All of us who travel through space, men from many planets, looking at those places, are moved, and never tire of saying, "Here is the place where the first dagger strike of brutal power was inflicted against the earth and its inhabitants. Here are the arrows, pointing to the Armageddon, foretold for men. In this place, Christian peoples murdered Jesus Christ and proclaimed the supremacy of the beast that will dominate the earth." If only earthly beings had enough science and dominated all of nature to not be poor. But since science for them is a great evil, let them live without it, but live. It is better to live in ignorance and let others live than to die drowned in a well of wisdom. They worship Christ in vain. They pay him homage uselessly. The only thing he wanted them to do was to love one another. Let man not pray so much with beautiful words, because God is not moved by rhetoric. Make your own life and love for your neighbor a constant prayer. There is still time to save the world. There is always an opportunity for the repentant. There is no criminal who cannot be forgiven. If the crime is great, God's love is greater than everything. If forgiveness required time, God would make a fraction of a second become an entire and endless eternity. Divine acts are not subject to time or space. That's why many criminals and in a moment are transformed into saints and martyrs. For an instant, they abandoned evil with all the strength of their hearts and perpetuated themselves in the action of a divine second. If God cares so solicitously for one soul, would he not care much more for humanity? Therefore, pay more attention to the moral aspect. Let science be an aid to enlighten you. I know you will refuse to tell others about the encounters we've had, but one day, circumstances will move you to do so. They will be the weapons that persuade you. However, when you do tell others, don't think it will make a great difference. Many have done so without apparent result, and the reward for their effort was only that which no one can take away, because it exists only in the depth of the heart. There will be someone, anonymous and however, to whom your words will be of great value. Now, goodbye. I'm taking some books to study Earth science more closely. When I return, I'll do my best to bring you something written about our science and the morals we practice. Meanwhile, we'll stay connected in thought.
So after that, I asked him, "And if you come back and I'm no longer here?"
It would be better, even if you weren't, because then you should be in another place, where it would be easier for us to make contact. But don't go without telling your friends that life extends through infinite spaces, from sphere to sphere, from world to world, and that beyond death, there are hopes and consolations. Tell them that wherever the spirit finds itself, God has already prepared a dwelling for it. The swan has always remained silent, but let it not disappear before it sings.
He shook my hand, inks and forearm, and said goodbye, once more. I wanted to follow him to the place where he was to take his interplanetary ship, but he told me, "Why follow me? Do not come."
My craft is very close to here, and you would not find it pleasant to see under what circumstances I board it. It pains me, and it would pain you too. There would always be a moment of separation, and before boarding the disk, you would no longer be able to see me. Stay with God.
I watched him disappear around the corner. I had impulses to follow him, come what may, but it would be disloyal to someone who proved to be such a friend.